Telling the Untold.
Live from across the divided states of America. It is time now for the last edition this week of the most disruptive show covering news and events across those divided states. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. In the news this morning, last night saw the second and last debate this election cycle between incumbent President Donald Trump and former vice presidential nominee Joe Biden. Moderated by Kristen Welker and taking place in Nashville, Tennessee, the debate stage was the seat of a much less contentious conversation than the previous debate between the two candidates 3 weeks ago. Trump and Biden went back and forth on the coronavirus and its associated lockdowns, on foreign policy and allegations of election interference, charges of corruption by each against the other, including Trump hitting Biden on the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. Talked about issues of race and the history of criminal justice reform, talked about immigration and ICE and the cages, talked about climate change, they talked about the economy, and they finished with a brief answer on the bases of what they consider their leadership less than 2 weeks before November 3rd. That, of course, is the date of the election. President Trump repeatedly focused on Biden's tenure as vice president, asking why Biden had failed to make substantive changes he's promising during this election cycle while he was seated in the second highest position of power in the United States for 8 years. Former Vice President Biden, meanwhile, sharply criticized Trump's handling of the coronavirus that has left over 220,000 Americans dead, and also hit Trump on his history of racially and politically charged comments. Our next headline, the FBI. You know what, Jamarl, actually, let's start it right there. What was your opinion on the debate last night? Before we move on, what did you think?
So I thought Trump did better in this debate with the muzzle than he did in the previous debate. Basically, people said, let Joe Biden talk. Also, it's I don't know. I guess I watched the entirety of the debate last night, and I had this feeling of kind of like, God, is this America? Is this the best America has? Like, this is all they got. I mean, basically, you have a Democratic president or Democrat who claim to fame is basically how bad the other guy is. And that's horrible. I mean, Biden is not pretending to be anything at this point. He's pretending to be incrementally better than Trump. And basically, you're left with a president that has, 220,000 deaths hanging over his head. And so at the end of the day, you have that where you can always go back to. I didn't think Trump did bad in this debate. I thought Trump actually did quite good. And I thought that you've been here for 40 years and you haven't done any of this stuff. Why are you trying to do it now? I thought that's actually a pretty effective attack piece.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It felt diminished. Let's say it that way. It felt diminishing at the end of watching that debate. I didn't necessarily feel hopeful or, none of this felt great to me. Both of these guys just felt like they were insufficient for this job.
I think they are. Yeah. And it's a gerontocracy in the making, whichever way it goes, which is a sad state of affairs. I mean, being old doesn't really matter, but the fact that both of them are so old, the fact that anyway, we're going to go back and forth on it certainly throughout the show. I want to get to these other headlines, but I fundamentally agree with you. It was depressing to watch in that sense. And I think in some sense, they actually each did better than I expected them to, but I had a really low bar. And the fact that they were able to jump over that bar does not say much for their verbal or physical elasticity, flexibility, ability to move. They're neither. But Trump is definitely more vigorous than Biden in this one, and you can see that coming across. Biden kept pivoting towards the audience. Even Trump made the comment when they were talking about China, and Biden tried to make it personal, and then Trump's like, "Well, you're a standard politician. We were talking about China, and you suddenly talked about sitting around the table. It's like a standard politician thing to do." He was right on that. But Trump also came across a little bit more consistently as, you know, a kind of grandiose, self-centered, that kind of thing. There was that brief moment towards the end of the first hour, I believe it was, where Biden went all self-referential. I thought that was interesting. Like, you know, you can't talk about Joe Biden like that. You know, he beat all the others in the primary. Do you remember what I'm talking about there, Jamarl?
Yeah, that's always a little weird when people do that. The Joe Biden stuff. But I thought Trump did better than I thought he was going to do. Biden, I mean, if it's a snooze fest, Biden wins it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Biden just has to draw.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to do anything extravagant. And that's kind of, that was always the problem with this. I will tell you this, though. Watching this made me think to myself, if Donald Trump would have had a little bit more standard politician in him, not to the degree of Biden or anything else, just more so classic in the way that he ran a campaign, or even in the things that he would go after Joe Biden with, he would have a chance in this. Like, I watched this thinking to myself, Donald Trump is not doing all that horrible in this debate. If he didn't have 220,000 people dead, he may actually have a decent shot at this race. So, I mean, and he still may. So, you know, who knows what the polling goes for. But no, I thought he did pretty decent in this race. And yeah, the self-referential stuff is a little weird.
Yeah. All right. You know what? Moving on to the next headline here. This is a controversial one, too. The FBI and the DHS say that state-sponsored hackers in Russia have been targeting U.S. government systems and the aviation industry, successfully accessing at least 2 servers. In a joint alert, the FBI and CISA report that a Russian advanced persistent threat, that's APT group, known in the security community as Energetic Bear, among other names, has been attacking U.S. state, local, territorial, and tribal government networks, among other targets, since September. The federal agencies alleged that in at least one of the successful attacks, the hacking group had been able to access passwords, IT instructions, vendor and purchasing information, and printable access badges. While the FBI and CISA emphasized that there is, quote, no evidence to date that integrity of elections data has been compromised, end quote, the attacks had put some election data stored on SLTT networks at risk. I'm going to quote here, to date, the FBI and CISA have no information to indicate this APT actor has intentionally disrupted any aviation, education, elections, or government operations. However, the actor may be seeking access to obtain future disruption options, to influence U.S. policies and actions, or to delegitimize SLTT government entities, end quote. My brief commentary on this, I want to go back and honestly do a recap of some of the stuff involving CrowdStrike back in 2016, and broadly the way that circumstantial evidence is used in these cases of hacking or cyber espionage, or different words get thrown around to refer to whether it's a private entity or a state entity that's doing this stuff. But broadly, it seems like how this, just to paint with a sort of broad brush for a second, how this stuff works is you have loosely affiliated hacker groups that are identified by publicly available techniques and their use of certain servers, which are also publicly available. So anybody could be doing a lot of this stuff. And then different companies and groups who are responsible for monitoring this will assume that it's a state agency based on the targets. But they don't have proof. It's not like they saw Russian fingertips on keyboards doing this stuff. It's not like they have a direct line into, the GRU or whatever. They make these assumptions. They make blanket assumptions, and they're often self-serving assumptions. Either assumptions that are going to benefit them, the company, in terms of larger contracts, getting them more money, or if you're associated with the state, it's in the interest of a state often to accuse another government because you can then justify sanctions, you can justify more military buildup, all this stuff. So this came out last night, not too long before the debate started. I haven't looked into it in too much depth, but broadly, just as a brief take, I want to go back over this stuff more if you're down, Jamarl, and I don't buy it, frankly. It just seems like part of more of the Russia stuff, as Trump said last night.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, too.
Anyway.
He said that directly. He was like, oh, more Russia. He's taking it directly at this point.
Yeah. He is, and this is a half an hour, 40 minutes after he was condemning Russia pretty sharply. So I'm just going to point out both sides really they're antagonizing. Both sides, the Democrats, the Republicans, Trump and Biden, they're both antagonizing Russia. But Trump is right. It is more Russia BS. Anyway.
It is. Wait, and there's one more thing. Well, go ahead. I'll make that my monologue.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, we can come back to that. All right, we've got more headlines to do here. The East Troublesome Fire is continuing to devastate parts of northern Colorado, swallowing homes and businesses in its path. Located near Grimes Peak on the Arapahoe National Forest, the fire has burnt more than 170,000 acres, 50,000 of which came on Thursday. It's currently only 5% contained. Evacuations are continuing to be implemented across Grand County. Strong winds and dry weather are fueling an explosive growth of fires in Colorado, weather conditions which are expected to remain until Friday night, when some light precipitation will begin as rain and then turn into snow for the weekend. The weekend snow of a couple inches may finally help firefighters contain the flames. As of now, 93% of the West in the United States remains under some sort of drought condition. In Lagos, Nigeria, one of the largest and most crowded prisons in the city faced a prison fire, as the city itself was reportedly subject in some parts to rioting and looting. These events are related to protests against police brutality in Nigeria, known as the End SARS protests. #End SARS. Those aren't protests against either COVID or the Southeast Asian Respiratory Syndrome virus, but instead they're protests calling for an end or at least a serious reform to the special anti-robbery squads in the country. Protests represent the most civil unrest the country has seen in over 20 years since the end of military rule there in 1999. Lagos, a city of 20 million people, is currently under a round-the-clock curfew. At least 56 people have died since the protests began. That was my count yesterday, with 38 killed nationwide on Tuesday alone, as protests have escalated since then. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, said the massacre could have been premeditated again. This was the killing of 38 people on Tuesday. The next day, the Nigerian army took to Twitter, labeling various reports about Tuesday's alleged incident as, quote, fake news, end quote. The NGO Amnesty International said that it had documented 82 cases of police brutality in Nigeria from 2017 to 2020. My next headline here: the European Parliament has awarded the Sakharov Prize to Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. This is a thumb in the nose at Alexander Lukashenko, Belarus's first and only president. European Parliament President David Sassoli said on Twitter on Thursday that, quote, it is an honor to announce that the women and men of the democratic opposition in Belarus are the 2020 Sakharov Prize laureates. They have on their side something that brute force can never defeat: the truth. Do not give up on your fight. We are by your side. End quote. That's pretty decisive commentary there. This follows the European Parliament's decision to not recognize the election results that put Lukashenko back into office and triggered the latest, sharpest wave of opposition pushback in a country that stands as a major buffer state between the European Union and the Russian Federation. I'm just going to quote directly here from German news outlet Deutsche Welle. They're speaking of Lukashenko here. Quote, that his country's opposition movement has now received the Sakharov Prize means the West has distanced itself even further from his regime, end quote. That, of course, leaves many, including, I'm guessing, both of us, thinking that, with Belarus being distanced from the EU, from the West, that brings them only closer to Russia. We've talked before with guests about the prospect of a unification of Belarus and Russia, the union state idea that seems to have been long in the making. Anyway, I don't know what's going to happen there, but that seems to be the sort of inevitability here as they're left twisting in the wind, so to speak, in between these two major power forces. In my next and last headline here, police in Poland have used pepper spray against hundreds of people protesting in Warsaw against a court ruling that almost completely bans abortions. This came in Warsaw after hundreds of people marched from the court to the home of Jarosław Kaczynski, as the deputy prime minister who heads the governing Law and Justice Party, to vent their anger at the ruling. Police said officers used pepper spray and physical force when some protesters threw stones and tried to push through the cordon around the house. The spokesman said that 15 people there were detained. Protest follows Thursday's ruling from the top court that ending the life of a deformed fetus is unconstitutional, making abortion only valid in cases of rape or incest or to protect the mother's life. Poland's abortion laws are already among the strictest in Europe, and it is estimated that about 100,000 women seek a termination abroad each year to get around the tight restrictions in that country. And with that, you've listened to our headlines on Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are going into a break, and we will be back in just a minute on the other side of some ads with Jamarl's monologue. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station from Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and definitely share the content. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can catch us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Don't be shy. I rarely bite. Definitely feel free to call in. Shane brings up a really good topic from last night, and it's something that became apparent as I watched the debate. And Trump, for the first time, I've heard him say, Russia, Russia, Russia. And that means that things have, let's say, diminished so much from the standpoint of the people who are pushing Russiagate, that the president of the United States, who was at one point cowed, at one point terrified to say anything in a box, and honestly, in real terms, if they would have found anything, could have been cooed in a soft coup and taken out of that office, now has the strength, the wherewithal, and at the very least, the feeling of distance to be able to castigate Joe Biden with that very specific topic. I watched the other day, we were talking about Nokia. Nokia is building a 4G cell network for NASA on the moon. And I'm just reading part of this, and these topics are related, by the way. Nokia's network will provide critical communication capability for tasks for astronauts will need to carry out, like remote control lunar vehicles, real-time navigation, high-definition video streaming, the company said. Now, understand why they're doing this. They're basically trying to get a manned moon base in lieu of a push to Mars. By 2024, they want to have a manned moon base, and they want to be able to have communications, rovers, and all of this stuff set up on the moon where they can try to get a push to Mars. We used to have this kind of aspirational way of looking at our world and our universe and our civilization. At the very least, when NASA and the moon race and all of this stuff, yes, it was international competition. By the same token, there was also a degree of international cooperation that took place around this issue of space. In this debate, what became clear was that we missed an opportunity. We did. Even though Donald Trump came into this race trying to be sane towards Russia in the way that Shane said, I would say conciliatory, Shane would say he was just trying to be sane. This was an opportunity for cooperation that for political reasons was torched. Understand what I'm saying? In the debate last night, it became very clear when Donald Trump said, nobody has been harder on Russia than I have. And he goes into listing. But if you think about it, Trump is right. Obama wouldn't sell missiles to the Ukraine. That's a harebrained thing to do. Trump did. Trump did because, again, they were harassing him and attacking him, saying he was friends with Vladimir Putin, that Putin had remote control devices in him, and that he was an animatronic robot for Russia. It was nonsense. But if you are under that much pressure, saying that you are in league with this group, this country that's supposed to be our enemy, what do? You push back. And his response to pushing back was doing some harebrained things that put this world on the precipice of disaster. Getting rid of the missile treaties. Again, sending weapons to Ukraine, something that Obama wasn't even hawkish enough to do. Obama's reasoning was, whoa, that's too much. We don't want the situation where we're going to have weapons in the hands of Ukrainians that are going to kill Russians. That's too much, too far. But no, in the way that they were pushing and attacking Trump, Trump did that. The attacks on Venezuela, the attacks on Iran, again, none of the stuff is things that are in Russian interests, and yet Trump does these things. Yes, these things were done for Trump's own ideology, not as a pushback. The sanctions, the elimination of the treaties, all of these things brings us to a precipice of disaster, as opposed to having countries in cooperation doing things like we used to with the International Space Station, or for that matter, trying to send our people as a world to a different world. There's a difference in how we can use our energies. And unfortunately, for political reasons, the way that Trump was attacked, his pivot in this made him more hawkish in regards to a country that we could find some allegiance, or at the very least some coordination with. It's unfortunate. And I think one of the things, if you listen to Biden, Biden is a maniac. And every bit as hawkish as Obama, and every bit as hawkish as Clinton. His argument, I'm going to make them pay. What does that even mean? What does that mean? Give us the real specifics of what that means, Joe Biden. I'm going to make them pay. He's going to make everybody pay. He's going to make China pay. He's going to make Russia pay. He's going to hit everybody on the knuckles. Joe Biden. Because he's the guy of moral clarity. Moral turpitude. That's the guy. That debate, and the sadness of that debate, is when you look at what we could accomplish with our energies, with our technology, with our scientific acumen, all of these things that are possible. We could explore our universe, all of those things together as one world, but instead we have conflict. And we have presidential candidates that seem to believe that that is the area to go. Conflict. We missed an opportunity in 2016. And that opportunity was missed, what I would put for entirely political reasons. We should be exploring the universe, but instead we're building our nuclear and hypersonic missile arsenal. Shane, when Trump went through this thing of nobody's been harder on Russia than I have, and I think back to the beginnings when he was a candidate, that wasn't who he wanted to be. That's who he ended up being, to push back against the political force that was trying to take him out of office. And like I said, that's horrendous, because that brings us to a precipice of disaster. Those treaties and stuff were put into place because you don't want a situation of a miscommunication where one side has a few minutes to respond to something they think the other side is doing. I mean, the entire point of those treaties was to bring down hostility, and one treaty begets another treaty, meaning one step towards, let's say, this understanding or peace between the two people begets another step. That was torched. And, I would argue that was torched for entirely political reasons. What do you think about what I'm saying here? I mean, in that debate, Trump did seem, and I've heard him say stuff like this before, nobody's been harsher on Russia than I have. But it gives this impression that the reason he was harsher on Russia wasn't because that was what I went in to do, meaning his goal wasn't to bring in John Bolton from day one. John Bolton was somebody he brought in as a weapon to push back against the attacks that were going against him. Does that make sense?
I mean, yeah, so it's intentional. They intentionally, it's a multi-pronged front thing, but this would be one of the reasons that they made Russia one of the big bones of contention here, is not just to antagonize Russia, but really to try to keep Trump pushed against them too. Because of course, if Trump makes any concessions, whatever that means, if he's seen to make any concessions in the media, those will be magnified, and they'll try to use what's magnified there to take him down. So it's intentional. It's a long-term pressure campaign. And why? Why is that the case? I mean, part of it might be we're still trying to cover up what we did in the 90s. Part of it might be that there are still members of an investment class, cough, Bill Browder, with money either in Russia or with a vengeance against the Russian Federation and Putin for keeping them from making more money. I mean, they're trying to kill the country in order to feed off of its corpse, to speak in the bluntest and the most cynical of terms. But the other side of this is, tens, hundreds of millions of lives on the line here. So the blindness and the short-sightedness of it. I mean, I'm 28 years old at this point. I'm a relatively young dude in the grand scheme of geopolitics, but it sickens me and it's shocking to me that the people who've been in charge for decades, who are now in their 60s, 70s, 80s, that they don't seem to see this. They don't seem to see that the almost inevitable consequence of their constant fear and warmongering is going to be death, mass death. And it's myopic and it's sickening. And so I don't buy into the whole like Satanist argument. I don't buy into the idea that there is like a satanic core of people. That's one of those conspiracy theories. But I kind of get why people's minds go there. If you see such atrocity and if you see such negligence towards the atrocities that we're committing and towards the tensions that we're building up to, it's like I get why people think that there's that really dark core at the high level. I just think that they're fooling themselves. I just think that they are lost in a sort of walled garden of manicured beliefs and perspectives that keep them from seeing the truth of the consequences of their decisions. But yeah, that was what they were doing. That maximum pressure campaign that's still ongoing, even though it's fraying around the edges, the anti-Russia campaign, the anti-Iran campaign, and of course the anti-China campaign. It's just trying to fight back any potential serious threat to American power. And that's palpably obvious to pretty much everybody we bring on this show. And I guess one of my weird curiosities and concerns is how can we make that more palpably obvious to the American people? Because that in some sense is the real foundational fault line, I think, in our country. That is one of the real, especially when it comes to the military and, our geopolitical stance and all these things. But another side of this is the Mill-Int complex keeps these other negative forces intact. It's like we had Alex Craner on pretty recently. And one of the first times, I think the first time we had him on the show after you and I came on as hosts, he was talking about the endogenous growth model. And you were just talking about how we could explore space, how we could take all of the sort of creative capacities that we're currently using to try to, keep progress at bay in various ways. And I don't mean ethical progress, but I mean some sort of global material, something like this. And instead, we're using that to try to further entrench our version of a world order. Well, we could have a multi-world semi-order. We could have some sort of distributed thing spreading through our solar system that's benefiting a lot more people, where people are living longer. They get to spend more time with their families. They, live in better homes, that kind of thing. And that could be so widely distributed between all people. I think you and I fundamentally share that same conviction. And it's so sad to me that instead of pursuing that, we're pursuing our own myopic, planetary self-destructive goals. Anyway, what's your take, Jamarl?
Well, it becomes an issue of who's in charge, and not just who's in charge, but this notion of power. Like, if, again, I keep saying this, if you wipe off all notion of good, bad, right, and wrong off the table, and you think about the world in terms of action and consequence, meaning I make a move here, and there's a consequence in the world that I think is to my better interest. And you don't care about who's at the bad end of that consequence, meaning the country that you've just created political rifts, the people who you've just, bombed, who were innocent and all of this. Yeah, that matters less to you. And if you're looking at the world in those terms, I mean, look at Brzezinski. I mean, Brzezinski made this argument that, talking about the Mujahideen, saying that, making Afghanistan basically a Vietnam for the Soviet Union. Now, did he care about the extenuating consequences from that? No, he didn't. Or maybe he did after the fact, but he didn't care in the moment that he was making those plans or those war plans. That's what I'm saying. If you're looking at the world just in terms of like a chessboard, and you're thinking, what is in my best interest? And you know that it's not going to come back on you, then you're incentivized to make those choices almost, especially if the American public gives you a pass, which the American public always does. It's only when there's a consequence. Either during the Vietnam War when people were being drafted, the Iraq War where you had all of those Americans being killed, 4,000, and then you had, $7 trillion? I mean, that's when the American public started to care. But at the point where it was taking place, not so much. Even now, the war in Yemen, does America care? Ish. So, it's like during the civil rights movement or before it. did people believe there was an issue with civil rights? Well, it was clearly there was, but the public, not so much, at least not whites. So I feel you, Shane. Yeah, we agree on this. It's unfortunate. We could do so much more with our resources. But let's do this. Let's take a break, and we're going to be back with Demetrius Minor. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
I can't reach Demetrius.
Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
No guest.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Shane Stranahan. I am joined by my co-host, Jamarl Thomas, and we are coming to you from across the country, broadcast live through our station in Washington, D.C. I'm on the West Coast, Jamarl's on the East Coast. We're back to that fundamental dichotomy here where we sort of straddle the country. That's an awkward image to have in your head. But hey, it's true. If you guys live in the DC area, you can catch us there on the radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also on in Kansas City, 102.9 FM, 104.7 FM, and 1140 AM. Also, if you are digging what Jamarl and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give up a like and share this video. You can go to youtube.com and do a search for either Fault Lines Radio or Jamarl Thomas. Both of those will take you to our live bubbling feeds, live video every morning, and a live chat room in each of those rooms. We're also on audio. If you want to catch us there, you can. The Sputnik app is a good place to find that audio. You can also find us on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Apple Music. And if you want to join in on the conversation at pretty much any time, you can send a chat. You can tweet at us, of course, twitter.com/faultlinesradio. And you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement is valuable. And with that, I'm actually opening up the phone lines right now. If you're listening and you want to call in, 202-521-1320 is the number to call. And we're there. Yeah, we're still trying to bring our guest on. For those listening, that's the sudden sort of change of pace here. Going to be talking about the debates from a sort of more conservative perspective, which is a good perspective to have on this. I think because frankly,
in this one, the Democrats, conservative, and lefty, so that should be pretty good. There's something else I kind of want to bring up, and it's something that you brought up. This notion of kind of the usage of resources for one thing as opposed to something else. Like the moment that I, as the United States, put a weapon in space, every other country has to do the same in order to keep parity. So think of the resources that go into creating that weapon, the technology and all of this other stuff, the energy that it takes to put it in space, the energy it takes to keep in space, the manpower, all of those things. Yes, those are jobs, but you can find other ways to do those jobs. But by definition, you almost force the other countries of the world that have the capacity to do it to do it. It's a tit for tat. By the same token, when you de-escalate, you also allow other countries to do the same. Meaning if we can come to an agreement that says, look, we hate each other, but let's not put anything in space because it's expensive to do so. And we say, okay, we're going to shake hands on that. So we're going to kill each other by typical means, not the means in space. Now that sounds weird, but that was somewhat of the rule, right? When no weapons in space, that was the understanding of it. but that's been blown to smithereens. We could
It's not
cooperate.
inevitable.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm
Well, we
asking. That's what I'm. That's
It
what I
has
was
to
going
do with
get
our
at.
leadership.
Is it inevitable? Like for example, the moment that you have a nuclear weapon, is there ever a situation where you're going to ever get rid of the nuclear weapon as a country?
Yeah, I mean, we have. I know what you're saying. You're saying in an existential sense, once you have that ultimate clincher, are you ever going to drop that clincher?
Right.
But we've gone through arms reduction, not as much as we should have or could have, but we have.
That's reduction. I'm talking about, do you ever get rid of it?
And I think there's definitely a possibility. We live in a sliding doors universe, or at least we may. Who knows? All these different ways things could have gone. So at some point, we may have never invented the bomb, 1944, 1945. If we invented it, some people had the good sense to not drop it, to not disclose its release. Even then, you can see different scenarios where you have some elite group or something like that who knows how to make it, but they're like keeping it hush hush.
No.
They've decided that's the wisest thing
right
to do.
now. The moment that
I know
a
what you're
country
saying,
develops a bomb,
but I'm saying, yeah.
Do they ever get rid of it?
I think we can. Yeah, I think that there absolutely is a possibility that we can. And this is one of those silly like catch-22 chicken and egg problems. But I think it is a presumption that there is no possibility that any country will make that move that, in part at least, keeps all these countries who have nuclear weapons, with their nuclear weapons in their pockets.
Exactly.
That's what helps to keep it in place.
Exactly.
That's not the only thing, because there is a material reality, and every country is responding to that material reality in a sort of game theoretic sense, where they're waiting and watching what the other countries do. But there's also just this presumption that we bring to the conversation. And we can change that presumption with different leadership, frankly. The voices that are having the conversations on the high levels, like this is the thin edge of the wedge, or this is the lever on history that humanity has, is we can change what we do. We can change the material reality that we're living in. Yeah, there are these trends. There's this material dialectic or whatever, underlying stuff going on historically. But people throughout history, specific people and masses of people, have made huge changes. And it really is up to us at this point, living at this point in time, to try to make those changes. It's just a matter of how, what's reasonable, what we should do next.
It is a matter of how. But the problem is that those changes, those things don't necessarily happen by magic. And I have a hard time believing that we'd give up our weapons. Because the problem is this: you have to trust. Like, if we say don't put weapons in space, okay, fair enough. I can check space to see whether or not you're lying or screwing around with that. But do I know as a flat fact that you got rid of all of your weapons? Do I know that? And if I don't know that as a flat fact, how can I, as another country, get rid of mine? Now, I may say that. I may hide some just to keep some in lieu and say, yes, we're going to get rid of the weapons and everything else. But the very act of that presumption that the other country is going to hide it. But you can make an argument that isn't the very act of hiding that nuclear weapon better than the overt sense of having it and showing it. Because the reason is, at that point, the hegemonic shift has been, we're getting rid of these weapons. And if the shift is that, then at that point it's not, it's not brazen, or it's not normal, or it's not natural, or it's not allowed to show it. It's almost like an incremental shift to the better, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, here's another side of this. And you know what? We are taking calls, 202-521-1320, if you want to call in. And we also, you know what? We don't have enough time for it in this segment. We've got a 7-minute clip highlight from the debate last night. I want to call for it in this next segment. So we're going to be getting to that. And if you want to call in to talk about the debate, you can. Again, the number is 202-521-1320. Here's the thing, man. If we were in a world situation, and this does seem sort of miraculous and unreachable right now, and potentially unmaintainable in the long run, untenable in the long run. But if you were in a world situation where the leaders of some of the largest countries, China, Russia, and the United States are some of the real big three powers that come to mind right there. You throw in the European Union, you throw in potentially Germany, depending on how the EU goes, the UK, et cetera. You could keep adding countries to this list. That's a relatively small number of key players to get at a table. That was the dream of the League of Nations, the United Nations. Arguably, that those have failed to some degree, but to some extent, the UN has succeeded. Going into a new order, whatever that new order or disorder is going to look like, they're going to have all these opportunities to reshape how those international organizations work. You could imagine them functioning where if you don't have a single hegemon, and in the case of the 20th century, the United States sort of tacitly steering or contesting with the Soviet Union for control of those things, if you have a slightly more distributed balance of power, you could see those organizations doing a great degree of good as these leaders come together. We have not lived through that era yet. We have only ever lived through an era of either a single hegemon or a contested hegemony between two major powers. If you have 3+, 5+, however many, 7+, whatever it's going to be, that is a fundamentally new era. We have not lived through that in the post-bomb era. So it's not, in some sense, it's miraculous to hope for it, but that's also just how good leadership and good statesmanship and good diplomacy has worked throughout history. That's not unreachable. It's just that we're still hitting the snooze button on this 70-year nap that we've been taking while we have nuclear weapons sitting in our pocket and we feel invincible.
Yeah, I mean, is it that we feel invincible. That's it. It's right there. But it's the snooze button thing. I don't know if is it really a snooze button? I mean, it seems like populations often tends to be out of touch in regards to allowing governments to do what they do. And I agree with you. In a cooperative world order, the world is different. But that's, that's like in a different world, the world will be different. Yes, I agree with you. It's the question is always, how do you get to that cooperative world? And do people, just like countries, do they like to give up their station? I mean, think of what takes place in the United States, because I think it's a microcosm of international affairs. You would have African Americans, Hispanics, you would have like civil rights rules and all of these things come into force. You would have African Americans, Obama getting in office as president. And whereas whites might hold a station of 10, you might have African Americans pop up to like 8. And you would have people say, they're taking our rights. And it's like, what are you talking about? Nobody's taking your rights. Or we want our country back. Nobody's taking your country. It's the station. It's this notion of relative distance between two parties. And how the farther apart that relative distance is, when that distance starts to close, the person feels like they're losing something. They're not losing anything. It's just the other person is gaining more. In this very specific instance of international affairs, the United States has a pinnacle from the standpoint of weaponry and economic might. And to your point, it gives a feeling of invincibility associated with that station. Great. Now, if you're trying to get to a collective world order, how do you get to a collective world order when one of the countries in that has a distinction between everyone else? And even if you did have countries that, let's say, didn't have that massive gap in regards to either economic might or military might, that country is not going to want to give that up. And any country that gets closer to that country is going to get edgy about its power waning. Hence the Louisiana gap with the issue with China and the United States right now. I guess I'm saying, I don't know.
Yeah, Thucydides gap.
Right, thank you, Thucydides gap. I don't know how you get to this point of parity around the world like that. And I don't even have this entire notion that if you got to a notion of parity, that the countries wouldn't end up in some kind of war trying to figure out which one is stronger. Yeah, I'm cynical about this stuff in regards to the way they relate. But collectively, maybe.
What's the minimum number of viable legs on a table? How many legs do you need for a table to stand? At
3,
a minimum?
I suppose.
Yeah, 1 doesn't work, 2 doesn't work, 3 is the minimum. 4 is better, 5 is better. At a certain point, it gets clunky. And admittedly, this is just a metaphor. I don't want to read too much into it. But we have not lived in a 3-legged world state yet. We have not lived in a sort of, I don't mean, world state. I don't like that term. But we have not lived in a sort of world.
You mean 3 powers?
System in which there have been 3 viable powers having to balance against each other. It's either been 1 is done or 2 who are contesting each other. But you know what? We should go into a break. I want to come back and I want to get to our caller, Gregory from Kentucky. We'll be back with you in a minute on the other side of this break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And sadly, our caller dropped. Otherwise, I would have gone straight to him. But we have a clip to play. This is a clip, a bit of a long one, from the debate last night. In case you didn't hear it, here are some highlights. Andre, let's go straight to this clip. This is from the debate last night between President Donald Trump and presidential nominee Joe Biden.
I take full responsibility. It's not my fault that it came here. It's China's fault. And you know what? It's not Joe's fault that it came here either. It's China's fault. They kept it from going into the rest of China for the most part, but they didn't keep it from coming out to the world, including Europe and ourselves.
What I would say is I'm going to shut down the virus, not the country. It's his ineptitude that caused the country to have to shut down in large part. Why businesses have gone under, why schools are closed, why so many people have lost their living, and why they're concerned. Those other concerns are real. That's why he should have been, instead of in a sand trap in his golf course, he should have been negotiating with Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democrats and Republicans about what to do about the acts they were passing for billions of dollars to make sure people had the capacity. I have not taken a penny from any foreign source ever in my life. We learned that this president paid 50 times the tax in China, has a secret bank account with China, does business in China, and in fact is talking about me taking money. I have not taken a single penny from any country whatsoever, ever. Number one. Number two, this is a president, I have released all of my tax returns, 22 years. Go look at them. 22 years of my tax return. You have not released a single solitary year of your tax return. What are you hiding? Why are you unwilling?
President Trump, your response.
First of all, I called my accountants, underwrote it. I'm going to release them as soon as we can. I want to do it, and it'll show how successful, how great this company is. But much more importantly than that, people were saying $750. I asked them a week ago, I said, what did I pay? They said, sir, you prepaid tens of millions of dollars. I prepaid my tax. Tens over the last number of years. Tens of millions of dollars I prepaid. Nobody has done more for the black community than Donald Trump. And if you look, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln, possible exception, but the exception of Abraham Lincoln, nobody has done what I've done. I am the least racist person. I can't even see the audience because it's so dark, but I don't care who's in the audience. I'm the least racist person in this room.
Okay, Vice President Biden, let me ask you very quickly, and then I have a follow-up question for you.
Abraham Lincoln here is one of the most racist presidents we've had in modern history. He pours fuel on every single racist fire. Every single one. Started off his campaign coming down the escalator saying he's going to get rid of those Mexican rapists. He's banned Muslims because they're Muslims. He has moved around and made everything worse across the board. He says about the poor boys, last time we were on stage here, he said, I told them to stand down and stand ready. Come on. This guy has a dog whistle about as big as a foghorn.
Mr. President, your administration separated children from their parents at the border, at least 4,000 kids. You've since reversed your zero-tolerance policy, but the United States can't locate the parents of more than 500 children. So how will these families ever be reunited? Plan to reunite the kids?
Yes, we're working on it we're trying very hard. But a lot of these kids come out without the parents. They come over through cartels and through coyotes and through gangs.
These 500 plus kids came with parents. They separated them at the border to make it a disincentive to come to begin with. big, real tough. We're really strong. And guess what? They cannot, it's not coyotes didn't bring them over. Their parents were with them. They got separated from their parents. And it makes us a laughing stock and violates every notion of who we are as a nation.
Let me ask you a follow-up
Kristen,
question.
they did it. We changed the policy.
Your response
they
to
did
that?
It. We changed.
Did not
they built the
separate
cages.
They,
who built the cages, Joe?
Let's talk about what
who
we're
built the
talking
cages,
about.
Joe?
Let's talk about what we're talking about. What happened? Parents were ripped, their kids were ripped from their arms and separated. And now they cannot find over 500 of sets of those parents, and those kids are alone. Nowhere to go. Nowhere to go. It's criminal. It's criminal. No one should be going to jail because they have a drug problem. They should be going to rehabilitation, not to jail. We should fundamentally change the system, and that's what I'm going to do.
But why didn't he do it 4 years ago? Why didn't you do that 4 years ago, even less than that? Why didn't you do it? You were vice president. You keep talking about all these things you're going to do, and you're going to do this. But you were there just a short time ago, and you guys did nothing.
We did.
You know, Joe, I ran because of you. I ran because of Barack Obama, because you did a poor job. If I thought you did a good job, I would have never run. I would have never run. I ran because of you. I'm looking at you now. You're a politician. I ran because of you.
All right, Vice President Biden, your response to that, and then I do have some questions for both of you.
Well, I tell you what, I hope he does look at me, because what's happening here is, you know who I am. You know who he is. You know his character. You know my character. You know our reputations for honor and telling the truth. I am anxious to have this race. I am anxious to see this take place. The character of the country is on the ballot. Our character is on the ballot. Look at us closely.
We have to make our country totally successful, as it was prior to the plague coming in from China. Now we're rebuilding it, and we're doing record numbers, 11.4 million jobs in a short period of time, et cetera. Success is going to bring us together. We are on the road to success, but I'm cutting taxes, and he wants to raise everybody's taxes, and he wants to put new regulations on everything. He will kill it. If he gets in, you will have a depression, the likes of which you've never seen.
I'm an American president. I represent all of you, whether you voted for me or against me, and I'm going to make sure that you're represented. I'm going to give you hope. We're going to move. We're going to choose science over fiction. We're going to choose hope over fear. We're going to choose to move forward because we have enormous opportunities. What is on the ballot here is the character of this country: decency, honor, respect, treating people with dignity, making sure that everyone has an even chance. And I'm going to make sure you get that. You haven't been getting it the last 4 years.
Here we go.
And we're back. That is a brief summary of the clip there. One thing that stuck out to me, this is kind of from the middle of the clip, but Biden never answered on the cages. Trump was really pushing him on that, and I thought that it was notable that Biden didn't come back on that. You know, you're talking about, of course, about the cages built during the Obama administration.
Yeah,
Jamarl.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, he's right about it, and he's like, even Trump saying, "I've done more for the black community than anybody else since Abraham Lincoln." That is, it's funny, but this kind of it goes to Trump's instincts on this stuff. Younger African Americans in higher numbers are voted for Trump. Now, these higher numbers, we're talking about like 10%. It's not extraordinary. But it is cutting into Biden's stuff to some degree. But even that, if he would have did that in a more polished way, you might have made gains. You see what I mean? This is kind of what I mean when I say, like, the political instincts seem to be there, but the execution doesn't necessarily seem to be on point. There's a few parts of that's funny. And Biden is like, you can trust me on my word. Really? Really? Yeah. It's unfortunate. That's all. It's like I feel like we lose with either party winning this, because both seem to have just checked out of America.
Yeah. I mean, America's kind of checked out of them. I mean, other than a few of the, other than the hardcore wings here, nobody, I'll put it like this. Nobody I know is satisfied with either of the candidates.
Yeah.
And I think it's not that long ago. People were pretty excited about Obama. people were, 2008 specifically, not the second term,
Jesse Jackson
but going
crying
into
on the
his
White
first
House
term.
lawn.
Yeah, there was a bunch of excitement in the air. There was genuine excitement. It was not a lesser of two evils sort of a thing. Yeah, man. People are checked out. People are
Obama was
snoozing. People keep hitting the snooze button.
politics in its fullest form, aspirational politics. I am black. I have a Muslim name. I'm going to change America. And you knew he was going to change America because he was black, he had a Muslim name. Both of those things were changes, right? And this was the epitome of this notion that identity somehow translates into policy. Meaning that just because of you're black or white or gay or straight or lesbian or whatever, that somehow translates to specific policy that will be to the benefit of the community to which that person belongs. The epitome of it. That's the grandest display of it. And he gave 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. That's why I always think the Kamala Harris thing is absurd. Where Clyburn would say, these black folks can shut up about Democrats taking them for granted. They got Kamala Harris. And you had a black president. I don't know what's the deal with the black female vice president that you believe is going to somehow trump the person who was in charge that had a record to the degree that he had a record on. No, that's always weird politics to me. But I thought Trump, if he could polish that stuff, would have done better in this. But Trump is Trump, and it's unfortunate.
One other interesting thing here is Trump successfully got Biden. It was subtle, but Trump is constantly hitting Biden on 40, I think it's 47, 48 years at this point in Congress. Years. He kept throwing the number around. I think it's 47.
Yeah, 47.
And then of course he was also hitting him on him being the vice president for 8 years. And what he managed to get Biden to do at a couple of points there that I hadn't heard before was to push himself away from Barack, to basically tacitly insult Barack Obama's performance. Basically Biden, and I'm paraphrasing here, but if I had been leading, who knows what would have happened. If I had been in charge, who knows how we would have done. I had just thought that's interesting, especially because this came just a couple of days after Obama, of course, backs Biden, goes after Trump, hounds him. And it's just interesting to see that happening. I don't know how that's going to affect the electorate. I don't know how much that matters in terms of their personal relationship or internal party dynamics or going into the White House. I'm not sure there are going to be that many people who noticed this or got pissed about it, but it was just interesting to note. Did you see that too, Jamarl?
Yeah, I saw that. But Biden has a tendency of appropriating Obama when it's in his best interest and pushing him away when it's not. So if you talk about bombing Libya, he would be like, I wasn't one of those people that agree with that. He would say something like that. But if you say something like the Affordable Care Act, yes, I was there right with him hand in hand. He does that. If you remember in the Democratic primary, I think it was Castro called him out on that, saying, you can't hug Obama when it's in your best interest, but at the same time, push him away or kick him when it's something that you don't necessarily want to be bothered with. But that's the way that in and out has been something that Biden has done the entire campaign cycle. That's something that he just, it's as vice president of the United States, if you're going to say that I'm arm in arm with Obama on one thing, then to some degree you're stuck with him on the other stuff. But he's been able to get away with that. So it's a weird dynamic. I have to be honest, though. I don't think anything that happened in any of these three debates matters from the standpoint of the outcome of this race. I think the thing that matters in the outcome of this race is that 250,000 people by the time the election takes place have died from COVID. And I think they blame the president. I think that's going to be the beginning and end when the final, tome is written about this election. I think it's going to begin and end with that. I could be wrong. What do you think?
We'll see. We'll see about that. We've got to go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in 1 minute with headlines.
to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And on that, you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to some headlines in the news. Last night saw the second and last debate between incumbent President Donald Trump and the former presidential nominee, Joe Biden. Joe Biden, moderated by Kristen Welker. The talk taking place in Nashville, Tennessee. The debate stage was the seat of much less contentious conversation than the previous debate between the two candidates 3 weeks ago. Trump and Biden went back and forth on the coronavirus and its associated lockdown, foreign policy, and allegations of election interference, charges of corruption, including the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, issues of race and the history of criminal justice reform, immigration, climate change, the economy, and the basis of what they consider leadership less than 2 weeks before November 3rd election. President Trump repeatedly focused on Biden's tenure as vice president, asking why Biden had failed to make substantive changes that he's promising during this election cycle while seated in the second highest position of power in the United States. Vice President Joe Biden, meanwhile, sharply criticized Trump's handling of the coronavirus and his history of racial and politically charged comments. Shane, one thing I do want to point out in that was the issue of the Hunter Biden stuff. Donald Trump tried to bring that up multiple times, and I don't know if it didn't seem to land. I mean, Joe Biden kind of didn't want to talk about it, oftentimes just dismissed it, but didn't delve on it. Honestly, I think that's showing itself to be somewhat effective. It boils down to this notion that it doesn't necessarily seem like this election will turn on that information. So it becomes, okay, is that information out too late? Or is that information just doesn't matter in the context of what the American public cares about right now? What do you think? I mean, because it seems like this is just getting drowned out.
We'll see how the Senate goes. But with a Republican-led Senate and now with a conservative Supreme Court, I think that Biden would have a hard time getting stuff done. So just take, if you forget for a second that he was vice president, if you forget that he had many decades of inhabiting Congress, I think that he'd have a hard time doing it. Now, when you take that stuff into account and, he's no longer in his vital prime politically, I don't see how it's going to happen. He's promising a lot of stuff, but I don't see how he's going to be able to do it. Trump, in a weird way, can probably make a more credible promise, particularly if, as he says, he manages to get the House. If the Republicans specifically, to be proper, if the Republicans get the House. If they do that, then they've got like a majority, a super majority there. They've got ownership of everything. Now, there's a lot to be scared of there, but the other side of that is, during a crisis, you want some executive authority to be able to make big decisions and actually have them get through. And the question there, of course, is if Trump gets reelected, what that's going to look like. Now, if Biden gets elected, then again, you have a Democrat-led House, Republican-led Senate, and a conservative Supreme Court. So it's an entirely mixed board there. And I don't see how he's going to be able to push through the vast majority of the changes that he was promising to push through.
Well, if Biden wins, though, I don't think Republicans are going to keep the Senate. I mean, it's a razor-thin lead now. And I don't believe that people are going to go to the polls, vote for Biden, and then vote for Republican. If anything, they're going to vote all the way down, or mostly vote down.
No, I don't know about that. That's the thing. I think a lot of people who are voting against Trump are voting against Trump. They're not voting against Republicans per se. They're voting against Trump.
That's not the way that works, Shane. I'm telling you, when people are coming out and going to the polls, they're not gonna.
I hear you, but I think Trump's an exception. I think that, in the same way that if Bernie were to get elected, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a huge Democrat upswing. There might be a bunch of third parties who come in, and that might have changed things. But Bernie wasn't the Democrat candidate in the same way that Trump isn't the Republican candidate. I mean, you can see that with the Never Trumpers and the Lincoln Project, a substantial number of whom, of course, come from the right. Now, they might be the neoconservative right, but that's still a big part of the Republican Party, of the Republican wing, the wider Republican diaspora or whatever in the United States. Yeah. I don't think he's representative of the party, but maybe I'm wrong.
Save this video, but you might have a point. I guess my thought is, if people are going out to the polls, and the catch though is Joe Biden, he's such an inert candidate, like you said. Like, the people are going, if they're doing it, it's to get rid of Trump. So, this is not a traditional election under normal circumstances, if that makes sense. You have people who are terrified, and those people who are terrified are going out to the polls not because of what the candidate is, but entirely because of who the candidate is not. So I don't know how that looks on election day. So let's put a question mark on this, just for it. But I do think I'm right, though. If those people do go out and vote Biden, I do think they're going to vote for down ticket. But we'll see.
Let's put a pin in it.
Let's put a pin in it.
Shape of a question mark.
Yeah, let's just see what happens. The FBI and the DHS say state-sponsored hackers in Russia have been targeting the U.S. government systems and aviation industry, successfully accessing at least 2 servers. In a joint alert, the FBI and CISA report that a Russian advanced persistent threat, APT group, known in the security community as Energetic Bear, quote-unquote, among other names, has been attacking the United States state, local, territorial, and tribal government networks, among other targets, since September. The federal agencies allege that in at least one of the successful attacks, the hacking group had been able to access passwords, IT instructions, vendor and purchasing information, and printable access badges. While the FBI and the CISA emphasize that there is, quote, no evidence to date that the integrity of the election data has been compromised, unquote, the attacks have put some election data stored on SLTT networks at risk. Quote, to date, the FBI and the CISA have no information to indicate that this APT actor has intentionally disrupted any aviation, education, elections, or government operations, unquote, the agency wrote. Quote, however, the actor may be seeking to obtain future disruption options to influence U.S. policy actions or to delegitimize SLTT government entities, unquote. The East's troublesome fire is continuing to devastate parts of the northern Colorado.
Jamarl, can we talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry, but I just want to address this because we're reporting it, and I want to be, accurate in a broad sense here.
Go for
it.
We
don't know what this is. We don't know what this means. Going back to doing research into CrowdStrike back in 2016 and various accusations coming from largely American cybersecurity research groups and companies and et cetera. A lot of how this stuff gets attributed is circumstantial. In fact, how this stuff gets attributed basically to a rounding error it's circumstantial evidence. It's not that they have direct evidence. They don't know who did the hacks. They don't know that stuff. What they see is the techniques that are used and the servers that are used to hack into other servers or to send, phished emails. There are different ways this stuff can happen. And then they assume, based on who the targets are and based on some continuity in the tactics used and the servers used, they assume that it's certain state actors. So they figure, for instance, if they assume that Russia has done this before, and then they see this stuff happening and they see similar techniques being used, then they will continue to assume that Russia's doing this now. But those are assumptions. In some sense, it's a house of cards. And it's one that, in my opinion, they're building intentionally simply to antagonize against Russia and to keep up this constant pressure campaign. And going into the election specifically, which by all appearances is going to be contested, I'm sure when it becomes contested actively, they're going to make it all about Russia, or at least a large part of it about Russia.
Yeah.
And why is that? There are deeper questions there about, what the ultimate agenda there is. Again, this is my opinion, but it's also my experience looking into this stuff. In any event, I just wanted to comment to that. We should come back on this with some more dedicated segments this coming week and in future weeks so that we can really, get into this story.
No, you're right. And look, president of CrowdStrike, Sean Henry, I mean, they had that in congressional testimony that he didn't necessarily know that this was Russia. I mean, do you remember that? Like when that testimony had been there for a while. Schiff had even had that testimony, knowing that these guys cannot necessarily attribute it directly to one particular country, and yet they still pushed that narrative. And
I remember back in early 2017, it was all about how 17 intelligence agencies had all blamed Russia for it. That was basically a roundup by the DNI. It's been a while since I've looked into this stuff, but basically, you go around a room, you sort of get everybody's opinion, you ask for everybody's opinion on something, and you're kind of giving them the opinion to give back to you. It was also all based on the analysis by CrowdStrike, the actual the company to inspect the DNC servers. This is all, it's like it all comes from a very small channel. The sourcing is all small and tenuous, and then they build it up and build it up and build it up into a story to make it seem like something. But at the first analysis, at the actual level at which you should be looking at this stuff journalistically, there's very little there. And again, it's sickening because it becomes a self-perpetuating narrative, what it's become anyway.
Also, keep in mind, other countries, just like us, have these hacking tools. I mean, if you remember, when the CIA lost access to their hacking tools, it was basically the capability of mimicking other signatures. So all of it, like, this becomes a wash where it's hard to know what's real, and you just get reports.
This is back in 2016. The malware that was used, I think it was APT28. Pardon me. That's not the malware, but it was associated with malware. It's this advanced persistent threat group that they'd supposedly identified. The malware was publicly available, and guess what? The servers, you can get those too. I mean, none of this stuff is
specific to the countries that they're talking about.
Assumed exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Let's keep going. The East Troublesome Fire is continuing to devastate parts of northern Colorado, swallowing homes and businesses in its path. Located near Grimes Peak at the Arapaho National Park, the fire has burnt more than 170,000 acres, 50,000 of which came on Thursday, and is currently only 5% contained. Evacuations are continuing to be implemented across Grand County. Strong winds and dry weather are fueling an explosive growth of fires in Colorado. Weather conditions, which are expected to remain until Friday night, when some light precipitation will begin as rain and then turn to snow for the weekend. The weekend snow of a couple of inches may finally help firefighters contain the flames. As of now, 93% of the West remains under some sort of drought condition. One of the largest and most crowded prisons in Lagos, Nigeria, faced a prison fire as the city was reportedly subjected to rioting and looting. These events are related to the protests against police brutality in Nigeria, known as the #EndSARS protests. Those aren't protests against either COVID or Southeast Asian Respiratory Syndrome virus, but instead protests calling for an end of the special anti-robbery squads. The protests represent the most civil unrest the country has seen in over 20 years since the end of the military rule in 1999. Lagos, a city of 20 million, is currently under a round-the-clock curfew. At least 56 people have died since the protests began, with 38 killed nationwide on Tuesday alone as the protests have escalated since then. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, said the massacre could have been premeditated. The next day, the Nigerian army took to Twitter, labeling various reports about Tuesday's alleged incident as quote-unquote fake news. The NGO Amnesty International said it had documented 82 cases of police brutality in Nigeria from 2017 to 2020. And with that, those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, so let's do this. We have about a minute. Shane, that's a great breakdown, and we do need to bring on somebody to have a fuller conversation about the CIA stuff or the hacking stuff. I remember this. I covered this when this first came out, but the leaks and everything else, but I don't entirely remember everything that's surrounding it. So it would be nice to bring somebody on for a refresher. But great breakdown. Like, to try to get across that this is not flat fact.
I was working on this. It's not. No, I was working on this with Lee. We were working on this pretty consistently back when we were working on this stuff together back in early mid 2017. This was as we found out about Alexandra Chalupa, there was a Politico article. Anyway, there's a continuum of stories here having to do with the origins of Russiagate. I think Lee would be a good guest, but there are a few other people. Jeffrey Carr was the name of a cybersecurity analyst who we interviewed at the time. Also, the head of there's another guy, the head of this company, WordFence, which you probably know WordPress. It makes WordFence is this plugin for WordPress, which is basically this website platform. Anyway, he did a good breakdown too. Basically, independent observers, when they started to look into the claims that CrowdStrike was making, saw it's a bunch of baloney. They're throwing stuff together, they're making assumptions, and then you have to ask, wait, why are they making those assumptions? Why are they doing such shoddy work? We haven't even gotten into the report that CrowdStrike did on artillery in Ukraine that they later silently retracted, basically. That was debunked, and they had to pull back. Anyway, more stuff to get into later. We've got to go into a break right now, but hopefully we'll come back to these stories pretty soon. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. Joining us right now is Joel Siegel, former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for the passage of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. He is co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network, JAMN, a nationwide multiracial climate action network. Joel, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Absolutely. No, we appreciate you coming on.
Your voice, man. How are you?
We're doing all right. So, first question, straightforward. What did you think of the debates last night, and did you watch the debates?
I did. For the first time, I really saw a very strong Biden. I thought the critique by the press and by Trump that he's old and he's mentally not there. I would say that was thrown out the window. I was very impressed with Biden coming out and saying we're going to have to go to 100% clean renewable energy, and that means the oil companies will have to eventually disappear. I wish he had said that he'd put everybody back to work and it would be a soft landing for people in the fossil fuel industrial cartel. I call it a cartel because that's what it is, just like the health insurance companies. They're a cartel. No different than a drug cartel. I liked that he talked about, it wasn't Medicare for all, but it was, a public option, which I was very impressed with that. I was very strong when he talked about the children in the cages and the cruelty of Trump's immigration reform. I thought Trump was basically like he was on Fox News. I thought he did not do a good job. I think that, it was a very good debate. I think Biden, he distinguished himself from Trump on immigration, foreign policy, climate change, healthcare. The only critique that I had for both of them was that there wasn't really talk of a robust safety net for the millions of people who are facing eviction, utility cutoffs. I was on a national call with Ted Lieu and, people who leaders of the progressive movement. And, the challenge I made on the national call was, if Biden gets elected and Kamala, is the progressive movement unified? Does it have enough strength to move Biden and Harris to the left so that there would be a robust movement for Medicare for all, jobs for all, housing for all? So, yeah, I just felt much better about Biden. I just hope that the election's not stolen by the $20 million Republican campaign to suppress the vote, Black and brown people, students. I'm fighting that. I started a national coalition, to fight voter suppression in all the swing states with Professor Harvey Wasserman. And, right now I'm really concerned about stopping the theft of an election through Russian intervention, through the chicanery of the Republican Party, which is an authoritarian white nationalist dictatorship.
I thought, Joel, thank you for being with us. I thought that, honestly, both Trump and Biden did a bit better than I expected them to. I didn't have a particularly high bar for either of them, but I think they were each in their own way both solid, and they both handled this one a lot better than the last debate. I also, just giving Kristen Welker props here, I thought she did a pretty solid job at navigating that hornet's nest, what could have been a hornet's nest. I also want to back you up. I do think you're absolutely right. They should have focused more on a safety net. Trump was talking in broad terms about the economy. He brought up the 401ks a couple of times. Of course, that's a lot of what's on the middle class's mind here. But still, they should have done more. And I think Biden specifically could have done more on that. I agreed with your analysis there. Where do you think this is going to leave Biden after the debate? Do you think this has substantially affected polling or support for either of the candidates? What's your take on that, Joel?
Good question. I think it strengthened Biden's support. The people who love Trump, they're going to vote for Trump. They believe what he believes in, and that's a racist agenda: ban Muslims, build walls for immigrants, cage children, take healthcare away from 20 million people. I just got a bill, by the way, for $89,000, and if I can, get on Medicare at age 60, which is a Biden-Harris proposal, that'd be terrific. So yeah, I think that Trump is sinking in the polls, but I'm 61. I've seen this too many times where a candidate looks like they're down the polls and they surge. So I don't count Trump out. With Biden and Harris, there would be an opportunity for the progressive movement to push them as far as we can to a human-centric agenda, which is housing for all, jobs for all, 100% clean renewable energy, Medicare for all. And we're ready. This country has to have a deep systemic transformation of its criminal justice system, the apartheid higher education system. We need a Marshall Plan of our inner cities, our rural areas, our Native American. We need to end poverty. We can't do that without a unified progressive movement like Mandela led and King led and Gandhi led. And that's really what I'm doing and what I'm involved in. It's up to us, the American people, to get people Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs that still are not met in the wealthiest country in the world. And the root of the problem, one of them, is we're a low tax nation where the rich hardly pay any taxes, and we don't have the money to invest in families and communities. And that's really the next frontier. We need a 21st century New Deal Marshall Plan to make sure everyone who wants a job gets a job, and so forth and so on. So I'm very excited. I mean, I remember when I was in Congress, I used to be a Congress speechwriter, and I used to always say, if we have a democratically controlled Congress and White House, we will be able to push universal health care. And, I was right. And I think that Biden could go down as a transformative president as long as the donor class of the Democratic Party is mitigated by a radical, peaceful, progressive movement. I think the Black Lives Matter movement has given us an opportunity to go much further than we could have ever thought of as a progressive movement. And now we got to take that energy into the streets and into the suites. I also believe that if we don't get what we want, if we get a Supreme Court justice that's far to the right and they want to, end abortion and take away healthcare from 20 million people, then we have to move to much more militant tactics. And when I say militant, I'm not talking about armed struggle. I'm talking about militant, where you block the streets, where you take over buildings. I've done that my entire life, work in the system, and then the system didn't do what it was supposed to do. Then you gotta, take care of business and hit the streets and utilize democracy. You can't do that without a coordinated progressive movement. I think that the NGO industrial complex has too much power, and we got to organize citizens. We got to organize nurses. We got to organize students, and it's organize, and push a Biden Kamala to the left. And that's where we're at. And when people finger point and the Democratic Party is a sellout, I was on a call with Daniel Ellsberg last night, and he said, I don't see that much difference in both parties. I disagree. We have a progressive caucus. We have an Hispanic caucus. We've got a Black caucus. I worked with them as a senior policy advisor for many years, and I can tell you there is a difference, with the parties. You can't push the Republican Party to the left. It's a brick wall. You could push the Democratic Party to the left if we get unified.
Question. What if... I understand hitting the streets. I agree with you. And getting more militant. Fair enough. But what does that mean in the context of being in a political party when we find out that lefties win the policy argument across the board, and yet the moment that Sanders loses or their candidate loses, they bend the knee? Meaning politics goes beyond just this notion of going and vote. And in the same way that you say you got to get militant, you got to hit the streets, isn't there something to be said for lefties, especially in 2020, where an opportunity was there for them to balk and say, we won these policies. You get our vote when you represent our interests. And I don't mean that in this incremental thing over Trump. I mean this in the grandest scale that your country is being availed by all sorts of crises and all sorts of problems. And we get this incrementalist nonsense with a Joe Biden candidate. I'm saying that in the same way you're saying people need to get militant, I'm saying the same thing should have taken place from the standpoint of lefties in this context. I mean, 8 million people or 7 million people are infected with an illness, and those people are going to have medical bills. Those people are going to have less or depreciated earnings going forward. I understand that there may be a difference, modestly, from the standpoint of the parties, but I don't understand the argument for lefties to accept this. So maybe that's the way the question should be framed. Because I don't want to hound, and I guess I'm getting a reputation of going after lefties when they come on the channel with this particular political disposition. So I'm not going to do that.
That's what you're supposed to do. Look, the one thing about having a brain and a heart, if I see that the tactics of progressive organizers who are getting paid to organize, and I don't see them being effective, I'm going to challenge them. Just like my brother Tom Hayden, may he rest in peace, he challenged my brother Abby Hoffman, one of my greatest teachers, on tactics. So it's got to be less about one's organization. I love where you're coming from. Look, we've had 7 million people who don't have housing, 1.3 million children. We have people who are locked up in prison who need to be released. We have insurance companies who are giving people crazy bills. We have millions of people on the verge of losing their homes, having their utilities cut off, having, just think about it. Utilities, electricity, having their water cut off. And this is about to go down. And I have organized a COVID-19, like a national response group. But it has to do with power. Power. Do we have raw political power on the ground? And it's because we really should be empowering the voiceless, the invisible, the left out, or as Pope Francis calls it, the throwaway people. So whenever you organize a movement, you got to do it with, not above, but with. You got to walk with the people who are hurting. And when I really believe that we need younger leaders of color, is I think will be the key to any future movement, who know how to organize. One of my critiques
Joe,
of young
let me interrupt you for 1 second, and we can come back to it. I agree with the power thing. I guess what I'm talking about is leverage and accountability. And those are the things that seems to be lacking on the left. And that's the thing, my consternation with this. But we can talk about it when we get back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The guest that we have is Joe Siegel, former congressional staffer and co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for the passage of Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. He's also co-founder and national director of Justice Action Mobilization Network, a nationwide multiracial climate action network, and we will be back. Oh, I'm sorry. Joe Siegel will not be on the other side of this. Okay, well, I'm just going to say thank you, Joe, for coming on the show. But we will be on the back side of this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City.
No, Ann. Just yet. She's not picking up.
Or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. By the way, if you're not listening to us right now somehow, but you still hear the words coming out of my mouth, and you want to listen to us on the radio, on AM or FM in Washington, D.C., we're on there, 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. Man, that was a confusing intro. That was my fault there. We're also on in Kansas City, 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Also, if you're digging what Jamarl and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, please do give up a like and share this content. You can check us out on YouTube. Just do a search for either Jamarl Thomas over there or Fault Lines Radio. Either of those will take you to our live feeds every morning. And if you want to catch us by audio, head over to the Sputnik app. Download that app. You'll see us there. We're also on Spreaker, on Stitcher, on iHeartRadio, on Apple Music, and on Spotify. And if you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a comment in the chat. You can send us a tweet at Fault Lines Radio over on Twitter. And of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. We're in the process of bringing our guest on very quickly. I'm just going to randomly note, Laith Marouf, we've had him on a couple of times talking about Lebanon. Jamarl, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah. Laith is awesome. He's fantastic guest.
He is awesome. His ban on Facebook got re-extended. So he was banned once for a month. Then like the day that he rejoined or something like that, very quickly, he was banned for a second month. We spoke to him. We've spoken to him a couple of times about that. And then just this morning, either last night or this morning, I saw he was banned yet again. So he's had a sort of 3-month contiguous banning session from Facebook.
That's astonishing.
It's ugly.
I mean, and keep in mind, the origin of this ban was because he transcribed a speech from, what was it, some Iranian or something like that? So it was a Iranian speaker.
One of the heads of Hezbollah. One of the heads of Hezbollah. But and so you can say, okay, he's maybe sharing some content from like this organization that the United States deems a terrorist organization or whatever. But news outlets are supposed to do that. You're supposed to be able to share translated versions of text from leaders of various parties in various places. If you can't do that, then that is an incredibly effective form of censorship across language lines.
Yes, it is. And it's done by a tool.
It's ugly.
By a tool of the U.S. Keep in mind, United States, what did they say about TikTok? They was like, oh, that's the Chinese trying to infiltrate America. And missing the point that our Facebook, Twitter, those things literally suppress speech from other places. I mean, the Palestinian sites that Facebook was getting rid of, Tell Us Sir, the Lebanon or Lebanese sites, Press TV, Lee, just transcribing it. Basically, we don't even want you to know what people are saying on the other side of the globe. That's profound. That's profound that they would do that. Again, that's what they do. But Ann is here. Great. So let's bring on Ann Wright, retired U.S. Army colonel, former U.S. diplomat, and co-author of the book, Dissent, Voices of Conscience. Ann serving in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia, and Mongolia. She resigned in March 2003 in opposition to the war in Iraq. In December 2001, she was on a small team that reopened the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. Ann, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. That is an amazing repertoire. Meaning, that is an amazing list of accomplishments, to put it mildly. Let me ask you this. We brought you on because I read your article going into the issue with China, and I was fascinated by this. I mean, we've covered China on the show, and I've covered it on my own show, especially asking questions like, what does China want? What is the objective from the standpoint of the Communist Party in regards to what they're trying to get to? All of those type of questions. But let's start at the beginning, though, because I want to get to the origins of the conflict between China and Taiwan and how the U.S. has been antagonizing that conflict, meaning this notion of a one China policy. So let's start there. Can you explain what's the one China policy and how did that one China policy develop?
Well, it developed in 1979, officially developed then in 1979 when President Carter recognized the People's Republic of China, and the U.S. had a status for Taiwan, which recognizes it in some ways, but not diplomatically. But certainly it does economically and militarily, because even though until this year, no senior U.S. government officials had visited Taiwan in over 40 years, and apparently until President Trump talked with the president of Taiwan, no president of our country had spoken with the president of Taiwan since President Carter kind of broke relations with Taiwan. The People's Republic of China considers Taiwan as a renegade province that ultimately will be brought back under the mainland's control. But Taiwan, which is not a large country as such, I mean, it's an island, but it certainly has a lot of economic power and dynamism and a lot of people, and by all rights should be considered an independent nation, as many islands in the Pacific are.
Can you please lay out, and thank you so much for being with us, and it's an honor to have you. Can you please lay out in a little bit more depth from each side's perspective, what is the merit, from mainland China's perspective, why are they pushing so stridently for it, and what is the merit in that push? And then, of course, from Taiwan's perspective, if you could just lay out each side of that from that side's perspective, I think that would be a good foundation for the conversation. Ann?
Yeah, well, I think from the People's Republic of China's side, they consider this island that's offshore as part of mainland China. And just like Hainan, which is an island offshore China, which they have always claimed and always had control over, their perspective is that they will ultimately gain control of Taiwan as they are slowly gaining control of Hong Kong. From the nationalist Chinese, as they call them, that started, the break-off between the communist Chinese and the nationalist Chinese after World War II, and then the Civil War in China, where the nationalist Chinese came on over to Taiwan and established their government there. So they strongly want to be independent and have been recognized over the decades as an independent country, although the People's Republic of China has slowly but surely been buying off other nations to stop recognition of Taiwan. And particularly in the Pacific Island nations, where there are a lot of small islands that are independent nations, they have been particularly courted by the People's Republic of China with lots of money for developmental purposes and probably payoffs to politicians to change the recognition from Taiwan to the People's Republic of China. And Taiwan, of course, wants to be independent. It has a good, strong economy, and it's kind of a crossroads for international travels coming from the west coast of the U.S. Into China and into Southeast Asia.
We've been antagonizing this situation. You made the point about basically after the Second World War, you had the break where the communists cede control or maintain control of the mainland island, the republic or the remaining or the opposition flees to Taiwan. But from the standpoint of the U.S., we've been using Taiwan as let's say, a platform, meaning Donald Trump has started to send weapons to Taiwan, basically blowing to smithereens this notion of a one China policy. On top of that, we've been antagonizing China within the South China Sea, meaning their domain. Now, to be fair, the South China Sea is under contention, but the U.S. has added its weight into that contention. Can you explain what has taken place there and the number of incidents that has taken place of just belligerence? And for that matter, Chinese response to that belligerence?
Well, first, it's not just the Trump administration that has been selling weapons to Taiwan. Even though there was a break in relations, official break in relations in 1979 with President Carter recognizing the People's Republic of China, at the same time in 1979, the U.S. Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act, which said that we, the U.S., would continue to sell weapons to Taiwan. And that has continued from 1979 through all these administrations. In my article, I mentioned about the Bush administration selling billions of dollars, the Obama administration selling billions of dollars of weapons to Taiwan, and the Trump administration has continued on that same line. The interesting part is that the Trump administration has followed up not only on the military side of it, but on the diplomatic side of it by sending the highest-ranking U.S. government officials ever since 1979, to include Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar, one of the undersecretaries of state to go to Taiwan, which is the first time that's happened in 40 years. And then the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. I mean, this sounds kind of like this is chump change, but in the world of diplomacy, it's a pretty big deal when you have the U.S. ambassador to the UN having lunch for the very first time with the Taiwan ambassador to the United Nations. All of this in the period of August and September of this year, which is, ratcheting up the Trump administration's pressure on the People's Republic of China, the continuing economic war, so to speak, that President Trump has laid down with the Chinese, and then following all of that with military war exercises. I mean, the United States has had lots of war maneuvers, exercises in the Pacific over the years. In fact, one of the biggest is called Rim of the Pacific, and it's held every 2 years off in the waters off Hawaii. And usually it's a giant exercise that may have over 25 countries, over 25,000 military associated with, hundreds of ships and airplanes, and they practice war for 30 days off the coast of the islands of Hawaii. This year, because of COVID, it was scaled back, and there were 10 countries that had that. But it is a show of force of America and its allies. Not only do they have that, but in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, the United States has what's called freedom of navigation exercises, which is the decision of countries to challenge any other country's claim to maritime extension of their land borders. And
we've got to go to a break right now. When we come back, I want to continue that conversation. I want to talk about those freedom of navigation exercises, and I want to move into another side of the dispute in the South China Sea. We were just talking about Taiwan. I want to talk more on the other side about the Spratly Islands, military bases, naval bases there, what the actual deal there is. We're joined by Ann Wright, retired U.S. Army colonel, former U.S. diplomat, and co-author of the book, Dissent, Voices of Conscience. We will be back with her in just a minute on the other side of this break.
Fault lines.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays, when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Octung, baby.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Ann Wright. He's a retired U.S. Army colonel, former U.S. diplomat, and co-author of the book Dissent, Voices of Conscience. After serving in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia, and Mongolia, she resigned in March 2003 in opposition to the war on Iraq. As follows, in December 2001, she was on the small team that reopened the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. And by the way, you can follow Ann on Twitter at AnnWright46. That's AnnWright 46, the numbers 4 and 6. You can also find her work on news sites such as Consortium News, Common Dreams, Truth Dig, and many more. And as we were going into the break there, you were talking about the freedom of navigation exercises. Can you please go into that a little bit? And also from there, lay out what is the deal with the Spratly Islands and the other contested regions in the South China Sea? What are the purposes of China here? What are the purposes of the other players? Why is the United States involved? What's going on there, basically? Yeah.
Well, for the past 7 years, since 2013, the Chinese government has been building up small islands or small atolls. They've dredged up over 3,000 acres of land and put it on these 7 atolls to make actual islands out of them, on which they put port facilities, radars, helipads, bunkers for fuel, and all sorts of equipment and facilities. And they say it's just, their opportunity to be a part of the international shipping that goes through there. Well, of course, all the other nations that contest that, which are Vietnam and Malaysia and the Philippines and the U.S., because the U.S. considers the Western Pacific an American ocean. We always have considered it since World War II, because we've had, all the huge military bases all through Asia and the Pacific. So the U.S. considers that's part of their ocean too. Well, anyway, so these 7 atolls are what the Chinese are saying. Well, these are now Chinese islands, and we protect our own land. These are the first islands, are port facilities really off out of mainland China, besides Henan, the island, other than one military base that the Chinese have put in Djibouti. The United States has over 800 military bases all over the world. The Chinese has one, and that's in Djibouti. But they now have these 7 little atolls, and the United States and others from the region, Australia, Japan, are all having these freedom of navigation exercises where they send in and for the United States, we've been sending in carrier groups, which means a giant aircraft carrier that'll have 5,000 or 6,000 people on it, usually a destroyer, frigate, other little armada of probably 5 or 6 ships to go through the Spratly Islands and the other islands to say, no, this is international waters. You have to keep these open, and we will continue to send our ships through there. Well, in response to that, the Chinese have mobilized their Navy. The United States has 11 aircraft carriers. The big ships that have 5,000 or 6,000 people on them and carry probably 50 or 60 aircraft. Well, the Chinese now have 2 aircraft carriers. So they have mobilized them, and they are having counter maneuvers in the South China Sea. So the South China Sea is a very dangerous place right now, where any sort of incident and accident could happen that could trigger a real military confrontation.
And I'm wondering, what are the chances for that? I mean, let me ask it in 2 ways. Has China said that the freedom of navigation thing is not allowed? Meaning, have they tried to impinge upon that of freedom of navigation of the other countries who are going through the territory? I understand that it's contested. I mean, you have all sorts of things that are contested. That's not necessarily shocking in regards to the politics of it all. I guess what I'm asking is there any capacity for reconciliation on this? And what are the chances for some kind of tipping point that takes place in those waters?
Well, there's always the chance of ships running into each other. In fact, the U.S. Navy has had a series of incidents over the last 5 years where naval vessels that have the most sophisticated navigational aids in the world have somehow run into other ships. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that these ships that are navigating close to each other could run into each other. Another aspect of this is that the aircraft that accompany the U.S. fleets could run into some of the Chinese aircraft that are coming close to the U.S. ships that are in these areas. Another aspect of this is when, and going back to Taiwan, when the U.S. officials were on Taiwan, the Chinese sent, the People's Republic of China sent an armada of aircraft. On September 18th, they sent 18 aircraft toward Taiwan and turned the aircraft just as it got to the air defense zone of Taiwan. The Taiwanese mobilized their air force. On the second day, September 19th, they sent 19 aircraft. The People's Republic of China sent 19 aircraft to right on the outskirts of the air defense zone. And again, the mobilization of the aircraft in Taiwan, and then one of the largest U.S. air bases in the Pacific is Kadena Air Base, which is on Okinawa, which is just about a 30-minute flight from Taiwan. So you have all of these military maneuvers that are going on with lots of aircraft and lots of ships, and the possibility that something will go wrong, an accident will happen, or perhaps a purposeful incident will happen, is very high. And most people in the United States don't have a clue that all this stuff is going on out in the Western Pacific. So that was the reason I wrote that article, because as I kept researching, here were more and more and more things that were coming up that surprised even me, and I try to keep track of what's happening out there.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
With some of the flights that you're describing, those could be chalked up to surveillance exercises, but with some of them, particularly with the ships, quote unquote, accidentally ramming each other, those are not surveillance exercises. Those are outright antagonisms. I'm curious, Anne, from an outsider's perspective, why is that going on? It almost sounds like a sort of emotional, like if you imagine this is a silly metaphor, but if you imagine you're in a nightclub and, jostling up against other people or whatever. There's a level of antagonism there that kind of comes with the territory. But these aren't drunk frat boys or whatever. These are nations who you would think would have a bit more sense and restraint. What is the ultimate purpose? Where do these fit into a strategic calculus, if there is one, Anne?
Well, you mentioned that these are frat boys. Well, the U.S. military is a group of frat boys and girls. If you look at alpha personalities, though, there are a lot of them in the senior leadership of militaries of all the countries. And that's one of the things, having been in the military myself 29 years, I retired as a colonel. I can tell you, you really do have to question some of the actions of militaries, the U.S. and others, and what the real purpose is. Is it just to bully somebody else? And here in the Trump administration, certainly bullying other countries is one of the hallmarks of its foreign policies and military policies. So the decision of the Department of Defense to ramp up more freedom of navigation exercises can be accounted for by a variety of things. One of them is, well, you just want to make sure that the U.S. flag is being flown out in the Western Pacific with its allies. And the other is the purposeful antagonism right now by the U.S. of China, which every day on television we can certainly hear President Trump doing that, on whether it's on the coronavirus or whether it's on trade deals. He certainly is belligerent, and his cabinet officials are. Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense, has been very, very bellicose in his statements about China. So the ordering of the U.S. military to ramp up its military exercises in the area, to include, I mentioned the Rim of the Pacific, but there's also another exercise called Vanguard Shield that happened in September, which had 11,000 U.S. military as a part of it, and another naval operation off the island of Guam, the U.S. territory of Guam, which is now has been built up as a major U.S. military island out in the Western Pacific, with a huge air base, a naval base, and now a marine base, having moved Marines out of Okinawa down to Guam.
And we only have about a minute and a half, 15 seconds left. And hopefully this question is not too expansive. We always ask this question about policy towards China, meaning whether it's going to be Republicans or Democrats. Their policy is similar. I mean, one is more belligerent, the other one is trying to use like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But what is China's policy toward the U.S.? Because if this level of belligerence is taking place because of China's growth or their capacity for growth and an understood capacity for growth and what that means economically and potentially militarily, what is their policy towards us? We have about a minute.
Well, I would say China is taking a different approach to the world than the U.S. has, where the U.S. usually goes in militarily to areas, and the Chinese have decided that they will go in economically. Their One Belt, One Road project, which connects China with South Asia and then the Near East and then up into Europe, is one of the biggest economic projects ever in the history of the world, to include the leasing of ports throughout the world. Part of my article goes into the numbers of port facilities in various countries around the world that the Chinese now have, to include in the United States one of the big piers at Long Beach Harbor, which is the harbor for Los Angeles.
And I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut you off. I apologize. It was too much of an expansive question, but I do thank you for it, and I do think you answered it. Economically is basically the way they try to go about it. But I want to thank you for coming on the show. Ann Wright, retired U.S. Army Colonel, former U.S. diplomat, and co-author of the book Dissent, Voices of Conscience. After serving in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia, Mongolia, she resigned in 2003 in opposition to the war in Iraq. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time for the last hour this week of the most disruptive show, simultaneously attempting to unify those states. In the independent corner, I am the political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall with my co-host Shane Stranahan, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to top headlines. Last night saw the second and last debate between incumbent President Donald Trump and former Vice President and presidential nominee Joe Biden. Moderated by Kristen Welker and taking place in Nashville, Tennessee, the debate stage was the seat of a much less contentious conversation than the previous debate between the two candidates, which took place 3 weeks ago. Trump and Biden went back and forth on the coronavirus and its associated lockdowns, foreign policy, and allegations of election interference, charges of corruption, including the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, issues of race and the history of criminal justice reform, immigration, climate change, the economy, and the bases of what they consider their unique strands of leadership less than 2 weeks before the election on November 3rd. President Trump repeatedly focused on Biden's tenure as vice president, asking why Biden had failed to make substantive changes he's promising during this election cycle, while he was seated in the second highest position of power in the United States for 8 years under Barack Obama. Former Vice President Biden, meanwhile, sharply criticized Trump's handling of the coronavirus, which has left more than 220,000 Americans dead, and also criticized Trump for his history of racially and politically charged comments. Jamarl, you and I have been going back and forth on this over the course of the show. We're going to be talking about this in a few minutes, I'm sure, with Caleb Mopin, our next guest. But any sort of last thoughts before we go out here?
I don't think so. I mean, I think our opinions on this point is kind of well worn. But yeah, let's bring Caleb Mopin in on the conversation.
I'm curious to hear what his take is. He was actively live tweeting this. I saw him during the course of the debate, every couple of minutes posting stuff. So he was avidly watching it, and I'm sure he will have some engaging opinions there.
It just felt
in any event, our next story here.
Like it really did. I mean, I didn't feel any. Like I felt a disassociation with it. Maybe that's what it is. It felt like it was almost I don't know. In the previous presidential races, it felt like that was the focal point. And oftentimes through the course of this race, it felt like the race was almost secondary, either to the protests or to maybe the fires or the COVID. It just seems like the race doesn't have the prominence that a typical presidential race has. That's the way it feels. Let me say it that way. And you have this other weird effect where either one of these guys who get in, they're so modest. Like the paucity of ideas just is embarrassing. The richest country on the planet, you have all of these resources to do all of these things, and yet, for whatever reason, you can't find the ability to do any of them. I don't know. It's just a depressing thing to watch. That's the way I felt about it. I understand people say that they like Biden, and Biden made them feel more comfortable in this debate. But I think this is one of those things where they feel more comfortable because they don't have a choice. You're getting to love the guy who you're stuck with, that type of stuff. But I could be wrong, and maybe I'm wrong. Biden may have a transformative presidency, and I may come around in 4 years like, you know what? Yeah, I was wrong. I'm voting for this guy again. But at this point, there's nothing to give me that idea. Nothing.
If it's a transformative presidency, it's going to be a transformation for the worse.
You
That's
think
my
so?
guess.
So
and
you
frankly,
don't think at all? You don't think there's any chance that he gets in office and I don't know? Let's say COVID gets much worse, and he says, you know what? Maybe we do need Medicare for all. Or something else happens, he says, you know what, maybe we do need to do X. Like meaning the environment pushes him in a way. Or do you think he's stuck in his ways? Joe Biden is just going to be an Obama presidency or Clinton presidency or...
Joe Biden is a husk of a candidate.
Yeah.
That is the final take there. You said paucity of ideas. There's definitely a paucity of ideas. There's a preponderance of speech, though. That's politics. That's all these debates amount to. I guess what was most frustrating is just that there wasn't anything that was that surprising. Like, and you know, it's not an entertainment spectacle where you need to be, you need to be cheered into, aroused constantly by something new, by novelty. But frankly, you expect them to bring something new to the table. You expect them to have some original perspective that they're, each time it shows a depth of character, and ideally it would reveal some new policy, most importantly, that, I've been thinking about this. Here's what we need to do here as a leader. Here's what I think here's where I think we need to go as a country. I'll be honest though, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was super excited. I was sitting there on the floor, on my pillow, on the floor, like 5 feet in front of the TV, just watching this thing. I had my laptop shifting between different positions so I didn't get uncomfortable, and I was into it for about an hour and a half there, and then
I watched
debate
it.
Ended, brushed my teeth, went to bed.
I just didn't have. I don't know, man. I agree with you. I think maybe that's it too. It's like nothing new. It's like this is well-worn territory. You know exactly what they're going to say. There's nothing interesting in this. And even if either of these guys get elected, meaning even if Biden gets elected, there's no reason to believe he's going to try to push through the stuff that he's talked about. Biden has a history of lying. And so it's like I feel alienated from it in such a weird way. It's very bizarre, my experience with this one. So, that's what I felt about it. I guess that's the
next headline.
Chapter.
Let's do it. I want to get through these headlines, especially because I'm gonna say something about this next one.
Yeah.
I just feel the need to qualify this one. This next headline: the FBI and the DHS say that state-sponsored hackers in Russia have been targeting U.S. government systems and the aviation industry, successfully accessing at least 2 servers. In a joint alert, the FBI and CISA report that a Russian advanced persistent threat group, known in the security community as Energetic Bear. I do love these names. Just the thought of an energetic bear is cheerful. But anyway, this group has been, quote unquote, attacking, end quote, U.S. state, local, territorial, and tribal government networks, among other targets, since last month, since September. The federal agencies alleged that in at least one of the successful attacks, the hacking group had been able to access passwords, IT instructions, vendor and purchasing information, and printable access badges. While the FBI and CISA emphasized that there is, quote, no evidence to date that integrity of elections data has been compromised, end quote, the attacks had put some election data stored on SLTT networks at risk. And a quote here from the agencies, quote, to date, the FBI and CISA have no information to indicate this APT actor has intentionally disrupted any aviation, education, elections, or government operations. However, the actor may be seeking access to obtain future disruption options to influence U.S. policies and actions or to delegitimize SLTT government entities, end quote. That's the official story coming from Western media, from U.S. media. I mean, I'm going to come again in with my take. Looking into CrowdStrike back in 2016, 2017, during that period, CrowdStrike, the company, the firm that the DNC hired to investigate, well, first it was other stuff, but then apparently when they were in there, actually, do you know what? I want to go back and brush up on this stuff because it's been a little while. But I believe the DNC originally hired CrowdStrike to come in and
do the service,
basically investigate.
They did.
Bernie. But here's the thing: it was a Bernie staffer. It was like a Bernie staffer who was working in the DNC, not Seth Rich. Don't believe, at least. Bernie staffer who was working in the DNC who had access data, and so the DNC brings CrowdStrike in. And then CrowdStrike, apparently, during their investigations, says they found this hack. They found this malware on the server, evidence of a hack at least. And then they wrote this report, and that was, in some sense, the dawn of one of the main threads, one of the main columns of the Russiagate narrative. Anyway, that was their origin. Just interesting to note. At first, it was a sort of anti-Bernie hit job there.
Wait.
And then,
also, add in one more point to that. They redacted some of that report that they gave to the FBI. That's mind-blowing. The report that CrowdStrike gave.
Here's the thing: they didn't give the servers. This
right,
is the thing.
They didn't give the servers to the
questioned
FBI, but CrowdStrike gave a report to the FBI, and the report was had stuff that was redacted. It was astonishing.
Yes, yeah, and then all of the intelligence agencies based with the 17 quote unquote intelligence agencies who came in and said this is Russia. That was all based on what CrowdStrike said. And again, I've said this in the last couple hours, and so I hesitate to repeat myself for people who've been listening to the whole show. But the way they do this stuff is circumstantial evidence. They do not have direct sourcing. They don't have direct evidence that Russia, or, in the story that came out a couple of days ago with the Proud Boys emails thing, the Russia and Iran. It wasn't even Russia. It was agents linked to Iran, and then apparently they linked Iran to Russia. And they don't even know that it was Iran. They're just sort of assuming that, I think, as from what I can see from what's publicly available. They're assuming that because of like the use of these Estonian servers and like these Saudi Arabian servers. Again, though, the thing is, it's circumstantial evidence. The whole point there is they can make an assumption to fit a narrative, either an economic narrative if they're a company that wants contracts and there's big money in these contracts, or if they're associated with a state to fit the purposes of that state to try to antagonize another country, as of course we've seen continuously in recent years. Anyway, I say all that just to say that I'm hesitant to accept this on its face. In fact, I don't accept it on its face. I want to read more about this. This came out about an hour or two before the debate started last night, and sadly, I did not have time to go super into depth on this. So I want to do more on that soon. We'll have more on this, I'm sure, next week, and ideally, this will serve as a good opportunity to brush up, go back over the origins of Russiagate back in 2016, 2017, how that stuff started going into CrowdStrike. We can get back into the whole Ukrainian narrative with Alexandra Chalupa and Paul Manafort, Serhiy Lyshenko with the Black Ledger over in Ukraine. There are a few different strands here. Anyway, moving on to other headlines.
Well, wait. I just want to add in one quote. This is Sean Henry, president of CrowdStrike. Henry testified that CrowdStrike did not, in fact, know if such theft occurred at all. This is talking about the DSC hacks and stuff. We did not have concrete evidence that the data was exfiltrated from the DNC, but we have indicators that it was exfiltrated, Henry said. What that means is we don't know that anything was taken. We just have indicators, meaning they don't even know. Like, and this was like buried in the congressional testimony. Like he says, there are times where we can see data exfiltrated. We could say conclusively, but in this case, it appears that it was set up to be exfiltrated, but we just don't have the evidence to say it actually left. We don't know if a hack took place.
Even in the original report, in the original report, which I'm forgetting the exact dates, but it feels to me like it was in July or August of 2016, the original report that CrowdStrike released on this stuff, they only had a moderate confidence level. Now, moderate confidence, like if you would use the words moderate and confidence together, that sounds kind of strong. But if you think about that, the entire edifice of that column of the Russiagate narrative, discarding the Steele dossier, discarding these other elements of it, that was built on this small company who's done troubled work, having a moderate confidence level, and then the DNI, 17 intelligence agencies, whatever, this umbrella, trusted that, and that's where we got that news from.
But right here, he admits we don't know. Like, it's very clear in the testimony, they buried this for 2 years. This didn't come up until like a year ago. But the problem is, the moment that this comes up, it becomes, oh, wait a minute. How do you know if it was Russia? It's like, well, we had indicators. Yeah, but you don't know. Like, you don't, like, that's the mind-blowing part about this when it came up. Because it was like, so wait a minute. The entirety, like you said, that all the edifice of this was built up on speculation and circumstantial evidence? Yes. If you say it enough.
Yes. That's what it is. No, it's one of those repeated lies. You know what? I'm gonna try to race through a couple of these headlines real quick. East Troublesome Fire in Colorado continues to burn. It's supposed to die down this weekend as rain starts to hit, but as of now, 170,000 acres burned, 50,000 of which came yesterday. Currently, only 5% contained. Over in Nigeria, moving to international news for a quick hot second. One of the largest and most crowded prisons in Lagos, Nigeria, faced a prison fire. The city was reportedly subject to rioting and looting. This is part of the End SARS protests against police brutality, specifically calling for an end to special anti-robbery squads in Nigeria. A city of 20 million people, currently around round-the-clock curfew, under a round-the-clock curfew. At least 56 people have died since the protests began, 38 killed nationwide. On Tuesday alone, Nigerian army denied that. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said that could have been premeditated. Over in Europe, between Europe and Belarus, the European Parliament has awarded the Sakharov Prize to the opposition leader in Belarus, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. I see this, and other people see this too, as a thumb in the nose to Lukashenko. To quote German news outlet Deutsche Welle, speaking of Lukashenko, Quote, that his country's opposition movement has now received the Sakharov Prize means the West has distanced itself even further from his regime, end quote. And you know what? I'll wrap it there. Those are headlines. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're going into a break. On the other side of this break, we're having a conversation with Caleb Maupin about a variety of topics, I'm sure, but we'll just start it off with a quick wrap-up of last night's debates. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that putting in a pipeline dispute that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And we are glad to be joined by Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm great. How about yourself?
Good, and better for having you. All right, let's get into this. I'm going to ask you, watching this last night, did you prefer the strong men or the tightrope walkers? Which part of the circus was your favorite?
Well, I must say, as someone who is not a Trump supporter, who strongly disagrees with much of what we heard from Donald Trump, I would say this was an epic performance by Trump. He was doing the Trump shtick, the Trump song and dance, very, very well. And as the night went on, he was really pulling out all the stops. I don't think it will necessarily guarantee him a victory in this election. I think there's a very good chance he will lose, according to all the data and polling and all the information and the way the country is going. But Trump knew what he was doing. He hammered home that he was not a typical politician. He called out Biden on his hypocrisy and made it very difficult for Biden to criticize him. You know, who built the cages, Joe? Who built the cages? You know, a lot of tu quoque, as they call it, right? You know, you also, he would be criticized for something his policies had done. And then he would just say, oh, yeah, well, Joe Biden, you know, Democrats have done the same kind of thing. A lot of things I didn't agree with Trump, but Trump stole the show. The debate was about Trump. And in U.S. elections, it tends to be, if the election is about you, you win. I mean, the Obama elections were about Obama. Are you for Obama? Or are you against him? Obama won. 2016 was about Trump. Are you for Trump? Or are you against him? He won. And I will say last night's debate was about Donald Trump. It was all about Donald Trump, and he handled himself exactly how he knows. You know, he knows what buttons to push with a lot of people.
Yeah, I do think last night was about Trump. I mean, Hillary Clinton, for the most part, made her attack piece on him. And Joe Biden, like I said, the majority of the people who are voting for Biden are doing so in order to get rid of Trump. It put me in the mind of the Spider-Man meme, where Spider-Man, two people are dressed up as Spider-Man and one is pointing to the other one. That's kind of where both of these guys were. It was like, well, you built the cages, Joe. It's like, well, you put people in those cages, though. It's like, what? Like, many of the policies are just one extension from the other. I thought Trump did okay in this debate. I don't know if it was anything value enough to change the trajectory of this race, because I agree. It looks like he's losing this race. What do you think he could have done differently to make this a different outcome? I mean, let's assume that he still has 200,000 deaths hanging over his head, because at the end of the day, that is difficult to explain away. And Joe Biden hammers that over and over and over again, because ultimately that's a clear wound that the American public is feeling and that the American public is blaming on the president. So assuming that wound is still in place, is there any way he could have come up with an argument to keep him in office around Joe Biden? Because I guess what I'm implicitly saying here is it's the deaths that's basically going to be the tale of who wins or loses this race. Maybe not anything else that has taken place over the course of these debates.
Well, what struck me was that during the healthcare portion of the debate, Trump did seem pretty incoherent. He wasn't putting forth a very clear position on Obamacare. He was trying to, as they say, have his cake and eat it too. He's against Obamacare. He's against, quote unquote, socialist healthcare. But he's not going to take away people's healthcare. No, he's not going to, keep. I mean, it was he wasn't able to give a clear position. At one point during the beginning of the debate, where they were talking about healthcare, which is a very vital issue during a pandemic, at one point he said something like, Joe Biden, you want socialist healthcare, and you're going to destroy people's Medicaid and their Social Security. And anyone watching that, you would think they would think, okay, well, Medicare and Social Security are both government programs. So if Joe Biden wants socialist healthcare, and by socialist healthcare you mean more government healthcare, would that not mean expanding, government program? It was incoherent, but it reminds you of the Tea Party. You remember back during the Obama administration when Obamacare was being passed, there were many examples, not just one time, but many times at a town hall, you get a Tea Party activist who would get up and say, get the government out of my Medicare, and keep the government hands off of my Medicare. And it was like incoherent, but it's this free market logic, right? Well, Medicare must be a private program. It can't be run by the government because it's good, right? And everyone knows that if the government does it, it's bad, right? So, I mean, it was really kind of incoherent, his healthcare thing. He said he's against the individual mandate, but he says that the Supreme Court, he wouldn't want it to get rid of pre-existing conditions, and he wants to get rid of Obamacare but create an even better program. Joe Biden then said that he was for Obamacare with a public option. But here's the funny thing. Obamacare had a public option in it originally, and he and Obama dropped the public option. And they dropped it like the second Republican opposition showed up to Obamacare. They said, you want a public option, you want a government Medicare program, and you want a government health care plan. And they said, oh, okay, we're sorry. And they just dropped it immediately. So now Joe is back to, okay, well, maybe we'll add a public option to Obamacare. This is I mean, the Democrats, and again, that was the problem, is that, this was probably where Trump was weakest. But, while Biden talked a better game about it, his response was pretty weak as well. So, I would say that on the stage, Trump performed better. I'm not sure how he could have done better. He did the best that a Trump could possibly do. But at the end of the day, it may simply not have the results that in terms of voting that will guarantee Trump's success. But he did a very, very good job.
The interruptions were less, too. I think it was 13 minutes into the debate, something like that, where the first interruption came in, and it was minor. And that pretty much held. And I'm sure the muting, the 2-minute mute at the beginning of each question and answer response segment, sure, that helped with that. But it also seemed like Trump was pretty committed to not acting out that role again. On healthcare, I mean, what this would have come down to, I think, you're right. Biden and Obama did do that, then they walked it back. Trump could have hit him on that. I think he would have done better to hit him on that. He was constantly attacking Biden with some good effect. Biden couldn't really respond to this effectively. Trump was constantly attacking Biden for having been a vice president for 8 years in Congress for nigh on 50 and not effectively getting a lot of these things done. He could have done the exact same thing with the public option comment. Might have seemed a little bit weird for him to be making that. It's almost a liberal argument, but it's incompetency. He can hit him on that, and I think that's been pretty effective. I'm curious, Caleb. I'm looking at a recent tweet from you. I'm going to quote this out here. If Trump is able to pull a win out of this, then all bets are off. We are living in a new country. I've never seen such widespread opposition to a sitting president from so many powerful places. This is really unprecedented, end quote. Not to put you on the spot there, but I'm curious, what do you think that new country would look like? Say Trump were to sort of defy the polling odds from the official polls at this point. Say he pulls out a win. How would you see that new country have? What does that look like to you, Caleb?
It would mean that a lot of the entrenched power in this country, a lot of the institutions that have long had entrenched power are not powerful, and that we're entering a much more, for lack of a better term, a more Wild West situation where basically there are different kind of forces, and it's more of a might makes right kind of situation. Because at this point, we know about Twitter and Facebook and how they went after that New York Post story, and the falling out that happened there. We've seen NPR and the way that they've been, refusing to cover the Hunter Biden emails. We are hearing all kinds of voices from the Bush administration that are backing Biden right now. I've never seen anything like this. There was opposition to Bush. There was a lot of Hollywood opposition to Bush, but there was a lot of support for him. There was criticism of Obama from the Tea Party, but there was also a lot of support for Obama. And, but this is unbelievable. It seems like aside from a vocal minority that is in the Trump camp, all the voices in American media, all the voices representing the American military, the American intelligence establishment, you name it. Every powerful voice seems to be loudly telling the American people, do not reelect this guy. And the thing is, that helps Trump, because that's Trump's image. That is what he has worked so hard to craft. He has worked really, really hard to tell people he's fighting the system, he's fighting the man, he's fighting the deep state. Vote for him because he's standing against the rich and powerful. And the thing is, that's not the case. We've seen the last 4 years. This has not been a situation where the working people are being championed against big corporations. I'm sorry, he's deregulated Wall Street. He has brought us to the brink of a confrontation. We were almost on the brink of World War III when he attacked and killed Qasem Soleimani. He has pandered to the Israel lobby. He has pandered to the fanatical right wing of Latin America with his efforts in Venezuela. I'm sorry, Trump has not been a champion of America's working people against the rich and powerful, but he's just so selfish. And that's really what it gets down to. If you read John Bolton's book, he's just a selfish person. He does not care about the long-term interests of U.S. foreign policy. He is not interested in ensuring that the country is stable. He's in it for himself. And the elites, I would say in particular, I talk a lot about the Eastern establishment of old money in New England and Wall Street and big oil and now Silicon Valley, that the entrenched Eastern establishment power in the United States that is working to ensure stability very carefully. They see him as somebody who could potentially just turn up the apple cart and create a completely chaotic situation in the country, and they want him out for that reason. But he is not. He's not a populist. He's a pseudo-populist in my view, because he has not fought for American working families at all. Really, I don't see him fighting to make life better for American working families at all.
No, I think he's a bull in a china shop, and I think America, much of the public, they wanted something dramatically different, even if it was going to be chaotic. And Trump was that person. But let's do this. Let's take a break. Caleb, we're going to bring you back. Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and a Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in context of a changing U.S. political discourse and geopolitical stage. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. Joining us, Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, I want to piggyback on something that we were talking about in the last break, meaning Trump and if he wins. And I agree with you. I did a video, I think a week ago, making the point to people, I can't fathom what it would take for him to win and what that means. Because that would, I think, would mean Trump would take the House. He would can keep the Senate. He already has the Supreme Court, so he would get 2 or 3 other picks on the Supreme Court. And he would be president. And you're talking about a checkmate across the board. Also, what's interesting to that point is it's clear as a bell that he is selfish, radically unempathetic, grotesquely incompetent. And this is clear. I mean, even the bro stuff, it's unmanly to wear a mask. That level of ridiculousness to be in that particular pinnacle of power like that is disturbing, to put it mildly. And yet, there are chances that he can win again. Is it fair to say, as odd as it sounds, that Donald Trump winning is it's almost like emancipatory democracy at that point? You have every entrenched power structure that is basically saying, don't let this man win again. Every newspaper, every journalist, every person that you see, every talking head, with the exception maybe like Fox News or Newsmax or something like that. If he pulls out a win, is that democracy over, I don't know, entrenched corporatism or something? Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to frame a world where Trump wins. Explain it for me.
Well, if Trump wins, it will be a total repudiation of the status quo in the United States. That's pretty clear. But it will also be based on limited options. During the debate, Donald Trump said the reason he was elected is because he's not a typical politician. And I tweeted out that, the Democrats had their chance to run somebody who wasn't a typical politician and get some of that anti-establishment populist heat with Bernie Sanders. But they just, made the decision that they were more committed to staying friends with corporations than winning elections. And that, basically Trump frames himself and very much is somebody that a lot of the elite in the United States, both in the government apparatus and in the, the corporate sector, see as dangerous. And that
wait, Caleb, I just want to interject something here. Yeah. I don't think that's the way the Democrats were looking at it. I think they looked at it as it's a gamble from a standpoint of, do we think that we can get our person? It's like, yeah, they rejected Clinton. But if you go back and listen to what Nancy Pelosi was like, well, we'll try this again after Trump has been in office. The thought being that, yeah, status quo failed this time around, but we can make the argument after Trump screws things up that we're the person to get in. Meaning their thought was, we're just going to wait our turn. And from the standpoint of a Sanders, they were, in their heads, Sanders was a worse outcome. And so for them, they would accept Joe Biden. I think that's the way they were framing it. They thought at the end of the day, the public, after a Trump presidency with all of these people dead, like you said, lack of choices, they will choose Biden over this in this situation with all of these people dead, meaning the public is not going to have a choice because the president has failed just that much, that anything that we put on the side of Trump at that point is going to be acceptable.
Well, that's the kind of campaign Joe Biden is running for sure. I mean, he's running an establishment campaign. He's running a hey, are you part of the establishment that doesn't like Trump? Well, come on board. And that's the kind of campaign he is running. And I mean, that, certainly does represent majority opinion among the elite, but I'm not sure that among the public, that he's going to be able to get the momentum to necessarily defeat Trump. I mean, he may do it. Polls seem to indicate he may do it, but polls last time seemed to show that Hillary Clinton had this in the bag as well. And again, people go to the polls to vote for somebody, not to vote against somebody. And Trump was doing the Trump thing very, very well last night. So we will just have to see.
I'm very curious here. What about the prospect that this is a contested election? Seems pretty likely, and that contest gets more and more aggressive. What does that look like? What is the backstop there? Caleb, what's your take on that?
That is an absolute nightmare. And I know that there are all kinds of think tanks running scenarios about this. That is an absolute nightmare. And I mean, I really hope that we do not enter a situation where the election is contested and there are different sides saying different people won and potentially violence in the streets. I don't think anybody wants that. And the results of that could be very, very, very dangerous for the whole country. And I would think that with so much time and preparation and so much widespread speculation that something like that might happen, I would think that a lot of decisions have been made in the lead up to November 3rd to prevent that from happening. I don't think either side really wants that. But in that kind of situation, if it starts to become almost a battle of wills, things could get very, very ugly very quickly. And I mean, that's all I got to say about that. And I really hope.
Yeah. No, I totally, I agree with you on that. I mean, the moment that you get to the point where everything is on the table, then everything is on the table. Like it gets, you get out of the realm of this kind of normality of the power exchange into something that becomes an open question about who's the sovereign. And at that point, all bets are off. That looks ugly. You wrote this book on Kamala Harris. Now, I think the Kamala Harris thing is dramatically important because I think that woman could be our president. And I even entertain the thought that this is somewhat of an end around to get Kamala Harris in office, where she is greatly unlikable and could never get in office on her own steam from the standpoint of a presidency. If you put her in with Joe Biden and Joe Biden aspires, let's say in a small amount of time, that she's president of the United States. What does it mean for her to be president of the United States and for her to be the vice president for that matter?
Well, I have said, and in my book, I make a really good point of showing that she was selected to represent the forces who backed the Hillary Clinton State Department.
Right.
There were some fundraisers that took place in the Hamptons, and she met, and there was all this talk of Hillary Clinton running again. And finally, it was decided Hillary Clinton would not run again. And the Hillary Clinton backers, according to a number of sources, put their money behind Kamala Harris. And she represents a particular faction that is committed to regime change around the world and destabilization. Her record is as a prosecutor in California, and it's an abysmal record, of just, as the California Attorney General, her office was constantly being criticized for prosecutorial misconduct. And I mean, she represents a very scary wing of American power, forces that are committed to, destabilization efforts around the world, as well as very strong efforts to try and manage the population here at home. And lock the country down. And I think that people should be very concerned about her. And that's why I put that book out, because I mean, the American people don't like Kamala Harris. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard took her down. She was rising in the polls, and then Tulsi Gabbard used her limited time on the debate stage to say, look into this woman's record, and that was it. I mean, all of a sudden, Kamala Harris was down in the polls. Well, now they've got her back on the vice presidential ticket, and, we may end up with her as president regardless of whether or not the American people liked her or not. I mean, Joe Biden is an old man. If he wins the election, he will be the oldest president in American history.
Yeah, that's we were talking about that side of it earlier. Why do you think Trump called her to the left of Biden then? To the left of Bernie? Why do you think that was his claim? Can you inject some sense into that comment?
I think the reason that Trump talked that way, first of all, is that, this is just the old Fox News thing, right? I mean, they claimed that John Kerry was like the most far left, member of the Senate, and that, far left, this is just beating a drum. But, she is a woman of color. I mean, Trump also said that he didn't think she was born in this country, which is ridiculous. She was very clearly born in the United States. And that this is Trump trying to scare his base and trying to appeal to that, resist the far left socialist communist agenda, blah, blah, blah. That's what that's about, and, I think that there is, there's a lot of, I think, the fact that she has a name, her last name is an Anglo last name, Harris, but her first name is an Indian name, right? And because of that, it's like, oh, she has a foreign name. She's from somewhere else. She's far left. She may not have been born in this country. She was born in this country. And this is just old Republican stuff, and it's kind of sad. But, there's a lot of older folks, I think, that are in the Trump camp that this stuff really works on. And they, hey, there's people from somewhere else. During the debate, we saw that with Trump, right? When he was saying that the Democrats' plan to deal with the pandemic, their bailout plan, would only help immigrants. And he said, this wasn't a plan. This was a plan to help. And then he paused and then he said, them, right? That was a racist dog whistle right there. We know what that was. It was a plan to help them. And that's the same kind of thing that Trump is doing with Kamala Harris. And that's the thing. That's why, I'm cautious in the way I talk about her, because it's kind of like with Obama. The Obama administration was horrendous, but the opposition to the Obama administration, where he was a socialist, Muslim, communist, fascist, it was so stupid, some of the opposition to the Obama administration. You had to be careful because you didn't want to put your words and have yourself be seen as part of that really dumb mob of opposition. So it's complex. And if you're going to make a principled critique and that there's a very, very stupid critique going on at the same time, sometimes you have to be careful how you word things, how you phrase things.
Yeah, you have to disambiguate yourself from the ridiculousness that goes out there. I'm going to end it here, Caleb. I want to thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate every time you come on. This is Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. This book examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise of prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse and geopolitical stage. Caleb, thanks again for coming on. Shane,
sure, always a pleasure.
This, the saddest part, I think, about the presidential race, and I guess this will probably be the end point of us talking about the 2020 presidential primary, there was no options. It's this paucity of options. You have 2 parties, both of which are capitalist parties, meaning you don't really get a choice. And both of these people who are on the stage are talking about things that mostly don't apply, or that says wrong. I know what it is. Because of what Trump is and because of how bad Trump did, the Democratic Party doesn't really have to put up anybody of substance. Anybody they could have put up a ham sandwich. And that ham sandwich would just stand there. And they would say, well, the ham sandwich didn't get 200,000 people killed. And candidate ham sandwich would have did a better job than President Trump. It would have been that. And I believe ham sandwich would pull it out barely by like a election, by one elector vote or something. I guess I'm making the point that because of how Trump is, the opposition didn't necessarily have to be all that much. And America loses as a result. Like, I did not want Trump to fail in this presidency. I actually wanted him to knock it out of the park. And honestly, even from the standpoint of just having some level of competition to force the Democrat to be better, I wanted him to do a decent job. And unfortunately, his closing argument, I don't think is going to matter all that much. What do you think? I mean, we have about a minute left. Well, 30 seconds.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? Let's just go into a break. We're going to be talking about this, I'm sure, on the other side. We're also taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in 1 minute.
Fault Lines.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And our phone lines are open. We're taking your calls. The number is 202-521-1320. Again, in a slightly more condensed form, 202-521-1320. That's the number to call. We've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on. What's on your mind, man?
I saw the debate last night and I was disappointed with Trump, even though I voted for him. I didn't see the 2016 Trump. Well, how Trump won in 2016, he had three crowds or type of people, right? Three groups of people. Your Alex Jones types, your Justin Ventura types, and your Jim and Dore types. He did not pull just Ventura types in the Jim and Dore types this time. He's talking about, did you hear him in Texas and Oklahoma? You already have Oklahoma and Texas. Pennsylvania's up for grabs. Okay, not everybody's into the oil field and taxes and lower taxes and 401ks. They want solutions, healthcare, things like that. Pull the troops home. He didn't even talk about pulling the troops home.
You didn't. Right? You're right.
He should have talked about the stimulus program. He's ready to sign it, and this, that, more and more and more. He could have put Nancy Pelosi out there. Okay, he wasn't pulling from the left. He wasn't pulling from the Jim and Dore crowd, the Justin Ventura crowd. I don't think he really had what's the name? Alex Jones crowd sold up. To me, it's even now, and either man can win. Trump had his chance last night. He didn't go after the crowds that he needed, dealing with things like that. Now everybody not worrying about China. You can care less about China and low tax cuts and 401ks and fracking. Okay?
The thing is, Tarif, if you have two people and both people are talking about tiny, tiny, tiny things, then the fact that both people are talking about tiny things makes it a competition where the other things are not even on the table for debate. So what do you choose in a situation where the two people who you're being given, neither of which is talking about dealing with any kind of real systemic problem? I mean, even the stuff that's overt, not so much. So I feel you on this, but it's almost like you have two bad candidates. I mean, and the fact that one is bad allows the other one to be bad also.
Tarif was talking from Trump's perspective.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, I think you guys are having a different conversation. Tarif was saying Trump could have and should have done that.
I agree.
And I agree with Tarif there. And you're saying from the voters' perspective, neither of these people are, they're both small beans. They're both talking small beans.
Exactly.
It's a distraction, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Right. It's like if you have two, if you had to buy toilet paper and you can only get it from two companies, one company is not that great. The other company, yes, does have an opportunity to knock it out the park. But they can also not be that great and still make way because of it. I'm making the point that you have two candidates and both are horrible. And just by virtue of one being bad, the other one gets to be bad also. But I would make the point that that's your party structure. And does multiple parties help this? If we were in a parliamentary system, would it be better? I think so, yeah. I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent. I mean, I can see I'm going to boycott Coke by drinking Pepsi, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, like we were just talking about with Caleb, there is a legitimate difference. I mean, Trump is just, here's the thing. I kind of wish I'd had this thought, or we'd had this conversation when he was still on. I think we're already living in that new country. The last 4 years, including this pandemic, are on the other side of this very quick realization of a long-term sea change in American politics, where we're living in a rejection of the status quo of America right now. And the status quo, as it tries to do in all of its various particular human forms, is hanging on to its power. But we're living in the detritus of that, of that kind of crumbling system. We're already there. And Trump, at that point, really represented an indictment of the system. And when he was elected, that indictment was served. In some sense, not that much more needed to be done. It was like a major nervous system shock to the body politic in the U.S. We're still living with that. We're still having the tremors from that. And whatever happens in 2020, people have changed. The perspectives that people have of politics, the perspective that people have of politicians, all that has changed. What's your take on that?
I agree with you that it's changed, but change is just the constant. Like, there's never a normality to go back to in this real sense. We always, just inexorably kind of make one choice after the next, moving ourselves forward. But I don't think there's a normality to go back to. I do agree with you that we hit that era the moment that Trump was elected. But I think the catch is, it's one thing to put somebody in because you want X or Y, or you believe this person is going to do X or Y. But after 4 years, and you have a tally, and you have an evaluation that could take place based upon what that person has done in that office, and if you put him back in office again, that's different. For some reason, that feels different. Like I said, I don't know what it means for Donald Trump to win with 50,000 people dead by the time the election takes place. I don't know what that looks like. It's possible, yes. And that's why I kind of asked Caleb, what could Trump have done, even with all of these deaths hanging over his head, to increase his chances of winning this election? And was it possible for him to win it in the context of a COVID crisis like this? I'm not quite sure, but we have a caller. Let's go to Tom. Tom in Florida. Tom, what's going on?
Hey, good morning, guys. Just wanted to add to what Tariq said. Tariq made some great points, but I think where he didn't touch upon who is running the debate committee. It seems as if the debate committee is just run by all Democrats. I mean, every time, and I could be wrong, but every time I see a debate, there's always some type of an operative that's running as a moderator. And when I watched the debate last night, there were supposed to be 3. We only had 2. We were basically watching the first one all over again. There were no other topics that could have helped Trump. And that's the thing that makes me upset, is that nobody seems to be fighting for the conservatives or the independent-minded people that would, decide on topics that are fair to both sides. And last night was just a total repeat of the first one, and it's beyond me.
Tom, give me an example of what would have been a topic that would have been fair for Trump.
Well, why didn't we talk about foreign policy?
Oh, I agree with you on that. I do agree with you on foreign policy part.
I mean, and that was a shill last night.
Well, I mean, technically they did. Technically, the thing is during it got drowned out by the corruption conversation. Yeah. But I think it was from 30 minutes into the debate to 40 minutes into the debate, something like that, 25 to 40 or something like that. There was a 10 or 15 minute period.
Yeah. Look, over the years I've been watching these things. Am I still on the air?
Yeah, you are. Go ahead, Tom.
Over the years, I've been watching these things, and when they have a debate, they go, oh, well, tonight's theme is foreign policy. We did not have that debate, and that was by design, gentlemen. I mean, let's be realistic. Trump would have killed it last night on policy if we would have talked about foreign policy, and that was by design. Thank you, gentlemen.
I do think Trump is stronger on foreign policy.
Thank you for the call.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I do think Trump is stronger on foreign policy. I mean, and see, the catch is Biden is such a right-winger on that stuff that I think he's better just because of Biden's distribution on the right. And I got to be honest, I might say the American public is okay with war, but I think all things being equal, if you give them a choice, they will probably shy away from it. And so one person who's willing to, I'm going to teach China a lesson, I'm going to make everybody pay a price. I don't know what that means. That's terrifying me here, if I'm being bluntly honest. I'm going to make China, Russia, all of these places pay a price for some kind of imaginary thing that might not have taken place. Not to mention, coming from the U.S., who does this on a daily basis and just normal. I thank you for the call, Tom. I appreciate it. Shane, what do you think, man? What's your closing thought, the wrap that's going to put this week in context? Kind of like Jerry Springer, after everything has taken place, comes in, gives his closing statement that makes the world okay. What's our hopeful statement going into the weekend?
I'm not gonna do that. That's a lot riding on my shoulders. I'm not gonna put on that mantle. But thank you for the opportunity. I mean, I agree with Tom. I think frankly, if we had a single topic debate, if we'd had more debates, 3 in my opinion isn't enough, and 2 definitely isn't enough. But if you'd had more debates, during the primaries. And yeah, he's right. If the questions were a bit more representative of what's materially concerning most Americans, then we would be a lot better off. But it's trivial. I'm trying to break out of this, but it's part of the decline. It's part of the political decline. I say that, and I know what I mean, but that's not enough. Just saying that is not enough. We've got to get into something a little bit more productive than that. Because while it's true, I'm criticizing something, we've got to get into some specifics. This is a bit random, but Brett Weinstein, does that name sound at all familiar to you?
Yeah, the name sounds familiar. But the stuff
Weinstein,
associated with him, but the
Weinstein,
name sounds familiar. Yeah. Unless I'm thinking of another Weinstein.
Yeah. Might be. It is not Harvey Weinstein.
No,
Brett
Harvey.
Weinstein was the teacher at Evergreen State College. Yeah. He kind of got famous as a result of going through the controversy at Evergreen State College. And then he's become, anyway, we've had callers call in about him before because he has this thing, the Articles of Unity 2020 website, pushing for a political reform of the United States on a fundamental level. A couple of months back, and I've talked about this briefly on air, that through that website, we're on Twitter. You try to post a link to it, and Twitter would say it's sensitive content. They wouldn't let you post a link. And then I believe it was yesterday, but it might have been the day before yesterday. He was outright banned from Facebook, with no warning, no notice that I know of, just banned forever. No potential to remedy that, and that's where we are. So, not a hugely prominent, a decently prominent person in the political space with an interesting idea. He gets banned from Twitter. Last week, New York Post, 6 of their tweets get hidden. Conversation gets hidden and tagged as sensitive and largely suppressed through that fact. We're living in a mediated information economy where we don't have control in some real sense over what we share, whom we share it with, and fundamentally, therefore, what we're allowed to hear and thus think. If I have a closing thought, I want to step back from the mockery of politics that was this presidential debate and just highlight that's not a good situation, and we really need to figure out ways to fix it. That's my brief take. What's your response, Jamarl?
I agree with you. I just don't know how. And in my head, it all collapses before it resolves. I don't want it to do that. I don't, clearly that has consequences associated with it, but I don't know how I don't know how to reconcile. We exclude information because, like you said, it's a decline. We're concerned with other information because of the discrediting of our own media and political institution. And hence, those institutions that realize they've been discredited are trying to find ways to protect themselves, hence the censorship, either through Twitter or Facebook, social media, or from the standpoint of mainstream news. Yeah, I don't know how to fix that, Shane.
I don't know how to either. Yeah, it's not the kind of thing one person can fix. But frankly, I'd rather try to fix it and fail than see the decline happen and do nothing about it. It's just a matter of what the heck we should actually do in any event.
Great.
We've got to close today's show out. This is also the close to the week. Thank you, engineer Andre, for your hard work. Thank you, producers Cam and Raheem. You're doing a great job. And thank you, Jamarl, for co-hosting the show with me. And last, but most importantly, thank you to the audience for listening. We're going to see you on the other side of this weekend. Hope you all have a great week. Signing off, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you on Monday.
Guys, I want to thank you. We put another one in the books. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, 7 to 10. Yeah, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I know it's early in the morning, so some people are on their drive and some people join us as the show, kicks off and gets going. You guys are going to see me later today. So, in fact, you're probably going to see me almost immediately. I have a show that I put up for yesterday that I didn't get the opportunity to do yesterday. So, I'm going to say like, share, and of course, subscribe. And Wesley Walker. Oh, thank you, Wesley Walker. Yeah. Back at you. My wife and I, not my wife and I have been binge watching Star Trek recently. And I forgot how good those episodes were. And I know it's like, yes, he likes Star Trek anyway. But yeah, I forgot how good those episodes were. I've been doing Voyager. And so my wife, she sits down there with me. She says, I get a thrill watching you watch Star Trek. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? Now, usually she's annoyed by me watching Star Trek because every few minutes I'm like, pause. He did that because, or her relationship with him, or Janeway was the only one who could have got them back. Love it. Voyager is fascinating to me. When it first started, I couldn't stand the characters on that show. I fell in love with Janeway. I ended up loving her. I ended up loving 7 of 9. I even ended up loving B'Elanna and her relationship with Tom. Like, it picked up as the show went on. The characters got so much better at their roles, so much better at the acting, and they just kind of soaked into the characters. By the time the episodes ended, Janeway was one of my favorites. And I still make this point. Her being a female captain allowed them a flexibility with emotion that you can't get out of a male actor. You just can't get it. There's no situation that I believe any of the captains, meaning Kurt, even when Spock was a captain, but Kurt, Sisko, any of them, if the Doctor, who's a holographic image that is made, and this is like photons and all this other stuff to give mass and ability to maneuver and affect matter. If that Doctor starts singing opera, and that Doctor basically says, I want to leave the ship and go planetside and be an opera singer because he fell in love with some opera singer, and the captain gives him choice in that, no male captain would have ever did that shit. Janeway doesn't want to interfere with the development of what she calls a sentient being. But in other situations, Janeway was on point. No. But I'm going to end this here. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you guys probably in 20 minutes or so after our meeting. Thanks all.